We had 3 unexplored corridors from the safe room, but we were following the note left by Caelora. The corridor was unremarkable, just like the other dungeon levels. It was a short walk before we reached a room with large, elaborate webs crisscrossing the ceiling. The floor was stone with small patches of emerald grass that danced in the light from above. Large, bulbous, man-sized white sacks dotted the webs. I was in disbelief. Could those cocoons contain the remains of Caelora and her group? My common sense told me there was no way they would have fallen to spiders. I tensed up, realizing for the first time that maybe the kettle of souls was gone, and we had no way of the city before being overwhelmed by the specters. Caelora could already be dead. I shook off the negative thoughts and scanned the room, looking for movement. My heart rate was elevated as I tried to figure out what we were dealing with. The webbing indicated spiders, and I was not a fan of spiders. Maveth, do you see anything? The floor is coated in webbing. Fighting with our boots sticking to the floor will be difficult. I glanced at the floor, and I completely missed it. Constantine would have berated me for not accounting for everything in the environment. The silvery green web strands were camouflaged, blending into the floor. As I studied the floor, Maveth speculated, I count 4 cocoons. Maybe the spiders are in there. You don't think those are people? Castiel's group? I wondered aloud, returning my focus to the ceiling. Maveth seemed to consider no, too small. They are smaller than legionnaire armor, only about half the length of a person. I nodded at his assessment after studying the sacks for a while. The cocoons were 40 feet in the air, near the ceiling, and the flowing lights around them created the illusion that they were bigger than they looked. Are we going to enter? Maveth asked, eager for action. Or maybe he wanted to reunite with the others. I considered our options. Go ahead. Take a few small steps in and step back out if anything stirs. I'll watch from the corridor. Maveth did not mind being used as bait and did not hesitate. He stepped into the room, taking small steps to draw out the enemy. His 4th step, just 5 feet from me, made a sticky tearing sound. The cocoons vibrated above him on their suspended cables. He tried to step back but struggled as his boots resisted the sticky strands now attached to them. 4 glossy black spiders emerged from the cocoons and immediately shot threads of webbing at Maveth. The thin spider silk did not look dangerous or capable of restraining the Goliath. Maveth had made it back to within a step of the corridor. His boots had dozens of sticky strands attached to them, making walking difficult. He twirled his hammer to intercept the incoming threads. The strands quickly wrapped around the hammer's head, forming a mini cocoon, reminding me of cotton candy at a carnival. Then, all of a sudden, Maveth grunted unhappily. They are trying to steal my hammer, Eric. As Maveth pulled on the handle, the entire webbing network on the ceiling flexed, and the cocoons and spiders bobbed from his effort to keep his hammer. I stepped into the room and cut the lines attached to the hammer. My black blade severed the spider strands with ease. Back into the corridor, I ordered, and we both retreated. I freed his boots from the strands dragging behind him. The 4 spiders repelled down to the floor, their glossy black chitinous legs tapping the ground, sounding irritated at our escape. The spiders did not approach us but seemed very agitated by our presence. Why do you think they're not attacking us? I asked Maveth. Maveth's boots still made a sticky adhesive sound as he walked. He was also having trouble peeling the spider cocoon off the head of his hammer. I do not know. Maybe they only have ranged attacks? They do look fragile, he noted with some contempt. Maveth's observation was astute. The spiders were not large and looked fragile, with spindly legs and oversized abdomens. Their heads were small, and their fangs were barely noticeable. It seemed these spiders incapacitated their prey before moving in for the kill. There were only 4 spiders. I wanted to find Caelora, so we needed to conquer this room. Maveth, can you get 2 if we rush them? The 2 on the right? Maveth's response was an uncharacteristic roar as he charged into the room. I guess the spiders had angered him by trying to take his hammer, and it was time for payback. Don't mess with a Goliath's hammer, I guess. I rushed in behind him, casting an air shield just above the ground as I did so. Maveth's hammer slammed into the first spider. 2 spiders shot a spray of dense webbing at me. My air shield intercepted the attack, the spider's silk pooling on the shield in a white mass. The spiders did not understand what was happening and moved closer to me. My black blade lashed out around the air shield, stabbing deep into one spider. The second spider tried to flee. I lunged awkwardly as my feet stuck to the floor and only caught 3 legs. It was crippled, oozing blue blood, and it struggled to get away. I looked over at Maveth, who was struggling to move his feet. The second spider had retreated toward the ceiling and was spewing webbing at him. The Goliath was angry but slowed as the strands began to layer him, restricting his movement. Maveth, use your skinning knife. Don't get captured. I moved to pursue the crippled spider, stepping on an air shield to allow me to move without hindrance. The spider was slowed from blood loss, and it offered no resistance when I ended its life with my blade. Maveth had freed himself in the meantime. This had been a difficult room, and we had underestimated the threat of the spiders. I got within range of the last suspended spider. It thought it was safe a dozen feet above us, but I used my dimensional space to butt the strand it hung from. For a split second, I thought I saw surprise register on its monstrous face as it fell a dozen feet to the ground, and I quickly dispatched it with my sword as it landed. The dead spider leaked blue blood, its spinneret slowly releasing more thread. The stone reward chest appeared, signaling we had cleared the room. Thanks to my air shields, it was not a challenge for me to traverse the sticky floor. Maveth's small runic knife was the best tool to cut away the strands that were slowing him down. My non-runic knife quickly got gummed up, its edge becoming useless unless cleaned repeatedly. My black blade worked as well, but it was awkward. I met Maveth at the chest, which yielded only a few silver coins and a single potion. I turned the potion to read the script. It says hover, Maveth, or maybe levitate. I can confirm it in the dreamscape. I'm going to use the collector. Is there anything else harvestable? Maybe the spinnerets? Maybe I can try. Maybe I can try. Maveth took his skinning knife and moved to try his best to harvest the spider. I remembered Delmar being skilled at extracting them intact. Maveth struggled to walk across the sticky floor to each spider. The collector worked on each spider, giving a minor essence of coordination. While Maveth worked, I tried to figure out what these spiders ate. The floor was stone with tufts of emerald grass scattered across it. I kneeled to study the grass. It reflected the light, giving it a shimmering appearance. I tried to pick one and immediately regretted it. The grass was flexible but sharp like a knife. A long cut formed on my palm, bleeding freely. Shit, that hurts, I hissed. Maveth looked up on alert. Is there a problem? The grass is sharp and tough. Maybe it's fuel for the spiders to make their webbing. It was a wild guess, but it made sense in this dungeon ecosystem. I stomped over to Maveth, who successfully collected 2 spinnerets. His first attempt had failed as he cut it with a knife, rupturing the sack, and the spider he'd smashed with his hammer had a split sack. I added the 2 sacks to my storage. We moved across the sticky floor to the only other exit from the room. Once we reached the corridor, we used Maveth's runic skinning knife to cut the webbing from various parts of our clothing and boots. My legs and most of Maveth's body had remnants of the spider silk. I decided we could clean it later in a safe room. This corridor was much longer and curved to the right, making it difficult to see more than 50 feet ahead. Eventually, it opened into a massive room that looked like an entire forest had been transplanted into the dungeon. The ceiling seemed even brighter, giving the trees something to reach for as they extended high above us, creating a green canopy. Remembering the phase spiders, I was hesitant to enter. I cannot see any other exits, Maveth's voice said over me. This forest made it difficult to see anything. The sound of an axe on wood suddenly echoed from deep within the woods. Maveth and I looked at each other. A second axe sounded in response. A terrible rhythm echoed as the 2 axes competed in different tempos. I was hopeful that those axes could belong to legionnaires. Maveth was also craning his neck, trying to see past the tree trunks. A familiar voice rang out over the chopping. Stay away from the knots. It'll be too hard to split with our hand axes. That sounded like Firth, Maveth said excitedly. I nodded and listened for a while to confirm, but only heard axe strikes. Let's go, Maveth. Be ready to retreat if necessary. We moved into the chamber, moving silently toward the other side. The sound of grunts and the thudding of axes grew louder. In a small clearing, I saw bloody Constantine harvesting a massive black bear while Firth Wiley and Mateo cut branches. I did not see anyone else, but Constantine was a part of Castile's group. Firth, Wiley, and Mateo had been with Felix. I signaled Mavaith to stay while I approached the group. Maybe I could surprise Constantine. My armor rasped as I moved, but the echo of the axe strikes covered the noise. Constantine suddenly whistled and everyone froze, including me. I was maybe 20 feet from Constantine, with his back turned. Firth asked, "What is it, Est? What is it? You think that annoying goblin is back?" Constantine slowly turned around and I hid myself. "I thought I heard something," he said. "And there is something foul in the air, yet there is no wind." The men suddenly dropped their axes and I heard swords being drawn. "So much for surprising them. Well, if you think I smell foul, then I'll just leave," I said, stepping out from cover. Mateo grinned widely. "Is that a virgin dryad or Eric? I hear they're both pretty rare in dungeons." His eyes slowly widened. "What in Pluto's realm happened to your armor?" My armor did look terrible. It was warped, charred, and recently covered in spider webbing. Constantine was cautious, still holding his bloody skinning knife in one hand and his runic weapon in the other. Firth nodded, like my appearance was just natural. Wiley started to smile, matching Mateo. Constantine asked, "Where are the others you were in charge of?" "Mavaith." I called the Goliath forward. "Brutus and the scholar got separated when we entered. We've been wandering for days." Mavaith came through the trees, and everyone relaxed, but happy faces abounded. I ignored his suspicion. "Are Castile and the others nearby?" Firth answered. "Adrian, Blaze, and Castile are in the safe room. We're gathering wood for cooking and harvesting the shadow bear." "What about Felix?" I inquired. Smiles faded and Mateo responded, "He did not make it." "The first room we tried," he trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Felix and Mateo were good friends, and they had been my roommates when I joined the company in Formica. I felt the pain of loss, a knot forming in my stomach. Constantine started pressing me for information, and I reported what I knew. We saw Brutus, Com, Dante, Linus, Flavius, and the scholar. We couldn't reach them because they were on the other side of a massive earth drake. They said Cyrus, Remus, and Soren were killed by the summoner outside the dungeon entrance. They think the summoner is now wandering the dungeon with us. "That would explain the goblin," Firth said. "It must be one of his scouts." I did not correct him and gave Mavaith a look to keep quiet about the goblin's origins. My news could have been met better. Constantine processed what I said, looking unhappy. He looked at everything that had been harvested so far. "We need to inform Castile. Let's focus on wood. We can always return to kill the bear again, but we need the wood to cook it." Mateo whined nervously. "I don't want to fight the shadow bear again." Wiley patted him on the back. "At least there was a healing potion for you after the fight." "Was it a hard fight?" Mavaith asked, interested. Constantine said dismissively, "It can move between shadows, and Castile's shadow chains had no effect on it. This is our second time killing the beast. Mateo just made the mistake of having his back to a shadow." Mateo winced at the memory. Firth appraised us. "The meat tastes a little smoky, but it's edible." He was inspecting our small packs, probably thinking we did not have much food. "Mavaith, help Constantine with the bear." "Show him your new runic knife," I said, smirking, knowing Constantine would be jealous even if he did not show it. We should definitely take everything we can. As we started working together, Mateo approached and gave me a hug. "Just wanted to make sure you're real and not a figment of my imagination. I'm sure you have a story about why you look like a fiery dragon swallowed you and then shit you out. It was odd talking with everyone after so long." Constantine kept eyeing me suspiciously, trying to figure out how Mavaith and I had survived for so long. Even on the first level of the dungeon, the rooms were dangerous. Once we were finally loaded with wood and bear meat, we started off toward the safe room, where I would reunite with Castile and the others. I was anticipating a grand reunion with the company. Mavaith would let me do all the talking to explain our time in the dungeon so far. Mateo entered the safe room first and flamboyantly announced, "We found some wandering creatures in the dungeon. They smell like an ogre's ass, but they're good people." This drew Castile's attention, and Adrian and Blaze looked up. Blaze had a massive grin on seeing us, and Castile smirked happily, though she did not quite allow herself to smile. Adrian looked pleased at seeing us alive, nodding to us and smiling. I challenged Mateo's statement. I think it was us who found you, and the only one in the company who has ever smelled like an ogre's ass is you. There was a chorus of laughter at the truth of my statement, since Mateo had literally wiped an ogre's ass outside of Mashakara. A brief debate erupted on who had discovered whom, since Constantine had smelled me before I announced myself. Adrian spoke seriously once the levity died down. He asked me pointedly, "Brutus and the scholar didn't make it." "They live. We got separated when we entered the dungeon," I said, pointing to Maveth. Maveth was struck by a spectre and lost contact with the scholar. We appeared on the lower levels of the dungeon. Castile looked confused. Adrian, who detested dungeons, growled, "Lower levels? That isn't normal." Then again, nothing about this dungeon is normal. I have never heard of any dungeon this large before, or with such a variety of beasts. Constantine interrupted the reunion to get me to report to Castile. "Tell them about the summoner and the others." I faced Castile, who was clearly happy we had rejoined them. We saw Flavius, Calm, Linus, Dante, Brutus, and the scholar. We could not reunite with them because an earth drake was in the room between us. Maveth leaned in, trying to help. "It was a really big earth drake, over 60 feet from snout to tail tip," I confirmed. "It was huge. But I think they're just a few rooms back." Brutus told us that he and the scholar exited the dungeon, hoping to re-enter near another group. My voice heavier, I continued. "They found the bodies of Remus, Cyrus, and Soren torn apart before they re-entered." Castile frowned at the news, and looked like she had been slapped with the sting of more dead. I added worryingly, "The scholar noticed bloody footprints leading back into the dungeon. He thinks an elf made them." Silence hung in the room before Constantine voiced what he was thinking. "If the summoner is in the dungeon, he might be using goblins to disrupt rooms." Unable to hold my curiosity any longer, I asked, "You saw a goblin?" "Twice, but maybe the same one both times. It appeared while we were fighting in rooms. The first time, angry spiders were chasing it, and the second time, it was a winter wolf." Constantine spoke, clearly frustrated. "We were occupied both times, and the goblin managed to get away. It appeared that the little goblin got around. I immediately took a liking to it if it could cause Constantine such anxiety." Blaise asked me hopefully, "Did you see any signs of the other group? Lucien, Pavel, Lurkin, and Benito." Pavel and Blaise were both company archers and often worked together. I did not have any good news for him. Looking him in the eye, I noticed Blaise's quiver only had 2 arrows. "No, but I'm sure we'll find them," I reassured him. "There is a lot of dungeon to explore." Constantine grunted at the truth of my statement. As the mood turned a little somber, Castile announced to everyone, "Prepare a good meal for the return of our lost companions." She motioned for me to join her and Adrian. I paused momentarily to place a large number of purple Vitalot potatoes on the stone, smiling as I said, my contribution to the meal. From what I saw, it looked like they had been living off meat and nuts. The potatoes got greedy stares from everyone as they were added to Firth's preparation. Castile now had a genuine smile as she stepped into the corridor directed at me. "I am happy you survived, Eric. How many rooms did you clear? And tell me about the ring." The shiny ring of sustenance was a bit flashy and easy to spot. I held it up, considering. "We found it in a room. I think it allows me to get by with less food and sleep." Adrian arched an eyebrow, surprised. "That sounds useful. And the Goliathus ring? I should have realized that the artifacts were extremely noticeable." "I would have to start wearing gloves regularly, or it would be an advertisement that I was wearing runic rings, since they never tarnished." "He's less affected by cold wearing it," I stated simply. Castile nodded in understanding. "They are probably a ring of sustenance and a ring of warmth. Both are rare dungeon finds. We've had our share of luck in the dungeon as well," she informed Adrian before focusing on me again. "And how many rooms have you explored?" Our focus was on trying to find the others. When we learned we were in the dungeon's lower levels, we tried to find stairs going up. "Our biggest challenge was getting around the drake at the top of the stairs," I said. I did not want to lie to either Adrian or Castile, but it looked like I had no other choice. I was probably showing a little discomfort, feeling cornered for the truth. Castile seemed to notice and rescued me. How did you find us? Did you come across one of the messages we left behind? Yes, a few rooms back. We found the safe room that led to the spider cocoon room. At first I thought the cocoons were victims of the spiders. Adrian scoffed at the thought their group would fall to spiders. Still, those spiders nearly trapped Mavis and me, I admitted. Weavers. They are called weavers, Eric. Castile looked at Adrian. We had 7 to handle the room, and I was able to restrain 3 of the weavers. With just the 2 of you, it is remarkable that you made it through. Their silk sacks are extremely valuable on the market, making an incredible thread for durable garments. They were mentioned in the scholars' books. Do you know how to reach Flavius and the others? Adrian pressed. Yes, I think they were in the direction of the sand room, I said, acting like I was thinking. I was obviously unconvincing as Castile's eyes narrowed. Castile moved in a little closer between Adrian and me. The sand scarabs are dangerous. We could not get them to surface to fight. I felt uncomfortable under her assessing gaze. Do you remember who I told you that you could trust, Eric? Felix, Adrian, Matteo, and Blaze. I recalled softly. Castile nodded. Adrian looked a little shocked that I knew of their shared conspiracy to leave the Empire. Felix is dead, Eric. That leaves Adrian. Castile nodded in his direction to confirm her trust. Matteo and Blaze. I could tell she wanted me to be honest with her. I was still having trouble sharing. Even Mavis only knew half of my secrets. I relented. We killed the scarabs. After killing the first 2, the others rushed us into the corridor, leaving the sand. Beyond the scarab room there's a room with 2 harpies. The others should be just beyond that room in a safe room. That's what they told us, anyway. Admitting that I could have joined the others had Adrian eyeing me suspiciously. Good, Castile said, relaxing now that she had the information she wanted. Adrian was not as content. How did you kill the scarabs under the sand? And the harpies, for that matter? He did not have a chance to ask why I had not joined the others. Castile gave Adrian a cold look. We can discuss this another time. Adrian, we will reconnect with the others after the Shadow Bear returns. Prepare the men with the good news. As Adrian left, I peeked into the room to see a number of people talking with Mavis. Could Mavis keep my secrets under the scrutiny of the others, Constantin in particular? Castile interrupted my concern and asked me softly again. How many rooms did you clear? I tore my eyes from Constantine and Mavis talking animatedly. It was hard to focus, but I thought about it. 12 different rooms, maybe. I was not counting the number of times we cleared rooms more than once. 12. Castile looked more than a little shocked. We conquered 7 rooms on the first floor and found 6 safe rooms. She seemed to be considering me again in a different light, either as a threat or an ally. Is the summoner a threat? Can he summon creatures inside the dungeon? I focused her thoughts on the other danger. Castile looked me in the eyes for a long time before speaking. I do not know. If he can summon creatures in the dungeon, he has access to more either, being so close to the ley line, she sighed. If he is in here, hopefully, he is struggling as much as we are. You seem to be doing well, I stated, realizing my mistake. We had lost 2 men in the city, 4 men in the dungeon, and 4 were unaccounted for. I added quickly, I mean, we are surviving well here. This dungeon could also be a major source of food for Sabril. Castile looked ill. No, we are not surviving in here, Eric. We got lucky that the Shadow Bear dropped a healing potion each time we killed it. Firth nearly lost his arm a few days ago, and Matteo got mauled by the Shadow Bear yesterday. Either could have died. Although the essences boost morale, we put our lives on the line every other day just to eat. I guess they had not been as fortunate as us with as many varieties of food in the rooms as we had. But then again, we visited twice as many rooms, and they had 7 people to feed. Did you know all the bears drop healing potions? At least, that has been our experience, I said. Not all the time. You must have gotten lucky. We have killed 6 bears and received 4 healing potions, Castile said heavily. I guess that maybe the dungeon was pulling back on rewards because Castile's group had 9 people. This dungeon was definitely aware of us. If the summoner is in the dungeon, are we going to flee? He would not be outside to stop us, I asked. Castell's eyes betrayed her as she was thinking the same thing. There were 4 men of the company we would potentially be abandoning if we left and tried to outrun the summoner. If he is in the dungeon, I assume he is checking the exit periodically for tracks. We could get lucky and get a head start or ambush him when he exits. It will also depend on how many specters are waiting for us near the entrance, Castile added. Adrian and I have discussed our chances of making it through the city to safety. If we try and have to retreat back into the dungeon, we will all be separated again. I nodded, as these were a number of things I had not yet considered. I would also like to confirm the fate of Benito, Pavel, Lucian, and Lurkin. The burden of leadership was in her tone and on her face. I nodded in understanding. Just let me know what you need of me. Castile smirked. Oh, you can be sure of that. We moved to join the others, and Mateo was complaining jokingly about the food. We really need to find Lurkin. This dungeon fare needs a professional cook to make it taste edible. Firth elbowed him, as he had cooked this particular meal. I was handed a bowl of purple mashed potatoes with charred bear meat chunks. On the side were some bitter, round, toasted nuts. I ate without complaint while listening to the conversations. So, Eric, how did you get your armor melted? Wiley asked. I chewed some nuts while I spoke. We encountered a female demon with pointy ears. She threw a fireball at me, and I failed to dodge. I shrugged like it was not a big deal. Everyone went silent, and I pulled out an apple and started munching on it to cleanse my palate. I do not know if they were more shocked at the apple or my fabrication about a demon. I tossed an apple to each of them in turn. I was careful not to reveal too much from my dimensional space, but it felt like the group needed a little boost in morale. I'll never ask you to use your amulet again if you have a second apple for me, Mateo pleaded after eating his core and all. I tossed him a second apple. I could see Castile reassessing me. The mood was jovial as we cleaned and prepared to sleep. Soon, everyone made to get some rest. The stone shelves and floor were packed with the 9 of us. I was surprised Castile had not requested the Dreamscape amulet. I had been expecting it. Instead, I utilized it for sword practice. The amulet worked with the ring, so I only needed 3 hours of sleep for a complete rest. I was up quickly, even before Constantine. Firth raised his head as I moved, but went back to sleep, seeing it was just me. I nodded to Blaze to get some sleep. Constantine was supposed to relieve him, but he eagerly took the extra sleep and found a cozy spot on the floor. 9 of us, soon to be 15. With so many, the dungeon rooms should not be as challenging. I watched everyone sleep, snore, and emit various flatulations. In a way, I felt at home. I felt much safer being with the company and sharing the danger, not so much the smell. I secretly popped an Apex Earth essence, and it roiled my stomach for a bit. I leaned against the wall, squatting as my body consumed the essence, and sweated through the assimilation. I needed to give myself more time between consuming affinity essences. I was finding that the magic affinity essences needed longer to acclimate than physical or mental ones. After about 10 minutes, I was able to stand. Castile stirred as my armor scraped against the wall. She was the quietest among us since she did not wear the hardened Legion armor. She surveyed the room and moved close to speak with me. She asked me a question for which I was unprepared. Do you think we should exit the dungeon and run after connecting with Flavius? She was essentially asking if we should abandon hope of finding Benito, Lurkin, Lucian, and Pavel. Lucian had patiently taught me to ride and everything anyone could ever want to know about horses. I had helped Lurkin cook and had eaten the food he had prepared for months. Benito was like my clueless younger brother. I considered Pavel a friend as well. I locked eyes with Castile. Is this a test? Castile looked impassive. If you were in charge, what would you do? She pressed. I realized I did not want to leave them. We could always come back for them. I hedged, thinking we could escape and return with support. Unlikely. As soon as we reach a Legion Hall, we will be called to the capital to report an account for our extended absence. Most likely, when we leave the dungeon, I will have us rush to Parvus, and then I expect we will be ordered to Portal to Telha to report to the Legatus Legionis, Castile explained. We will not be allowed to return to Sobral City. My first thought was of poor Ginger. She was going to wonder why I never returned. Castile interrupted my thoughts. So, you would leave without knowing their fate? I understood that Castile was soliciting advice for her own imminent decision. My mind raced for an answer. If I were in command, I would map the entire first level of the dungeon looking for them. That way, I would feel I put in an effort to find them, and my conscience would be clear. Castile looked much older as her stern expression relaxed. There are 99 safe rooms on the first level of the shimmering labyrinth. We learned that much from the elven scrawl on the walls in the safe rooms. That is, as long as this dungeon has not grown in the last 1500 years. The elven writing also indicated there are 7 different descents to access the second level of the dungeon. We found one of those stairs, but did not descend. We do not even know if there are levels below the second. If you arrived on the second level, they could have done so too. I thought Castile wanted me to tell her it was okay to leave the others, but I could not be responsible for that decision, and spoke without decorum. Benito had a broken wrist when he entered the dungeon, but he's tough. We shouldn't give up on them until we know for sure. Castile's face soured slightly, and she did not get the answer she wanted. She nodded but then asked, "Where did you get the Apex Earth essence?" My surprised expression made her smile slyly. All-seeing eye, she explained how she knew. She must have been using the spell while pretending to sleep. It is a fight with the dungeon to use it past the current room, but I am getting better with it. It was just luck I saw you consume it. I decided to tell her the truth. From the Earth Drake, her eyebrows arched. I had confirmed what she already knew he had Durandus Collector. The big one Maveth mentioned, she asked in disbelief. I nodded. Do not tell me more. We can talk after I am questioned in Telha by the truth-seekers. Constantine stirred and stood, suspiciously eyeing us near the corridor, maybe irritated that I had woken before him. He stood noisily, waking a few men. I will sit on the Shadowbear room, he announced to Castile, and then set off down the corridor with his pack. Soon everyone was stirring, and it was Mateo's turn to cook. They had only harvested meat, mushrooms, and nuts. They had a little salt from a room with a saltwater lake, but had not have enough wood to evaporate much water to claim the salt. We moved as a group to join Constantine. He was sitting in the corridor, whittling a stick. He looked at us. Still not time, maybe an hour or two. Huddled in the corridor, our smelly group watched the room intently. The skinned shadow bear was barely visible. Blaze was the one who noticed the reset first. It's gone. Adrian started issuing orders. Stay away from the shadowy canopies. Draw it to the perimeter. Pair off and work together. Maveth and I were left as a pair. Constantine entered with Firth at his side. A bear's roar sounded from the center of the chamber. I entered, and moved right with Maveth. The shadow bear appeared far to the left, emerging like a nightmare out of the shadows on the ground. It was an odd visual as it charged at Mateo and Wiley. Mateo yelled angrily, "Ah, shit, not again." I must taste good. He braced for the bear's charge with his dented and damaged shield. The twang of a bow sent an arrow into the bear's neck, halting its charge. Its paws swatted the arrow, snapping the shaft. The bear dove into a shadow, disappearing as if into a pool. Constantine moved forward. It will not be able to hide for long. Be ready. The shadow bear emerged on our side, and Maveth stepped toward its emerging form. His hammer swung down on its skull as it was partially out of the shadow. A loud crack resounded in the room, and the bear slid back into the shadow, disappearing. Everyone remained tense, ready for the bear to return. Constantine finally said, "I can see the reward chest. It must be dead. Search the trees for the core." We searched in groups of 3, but the bear's corpse was nowhere among the trees. Adrian was upset about losing the bear meat. Castile thought the bear must have been trapped in the shadow and died from Maveth's strike. Adrian directed me. "Eric, you are responsible for organizing the harvest of wood and nuts. These were the same bitter nuts we had at breakfast. I sent 4 men to chop wood, and I joined Maveth in picking up the nuts on the ground, or he would hit a tree with his hammer to get the nuts to fall. It was disappointing not to get any meat, but no one blamed Maveth. Instead, they congratulated him on his impressive killing blow. When we had a moment alone, I asked Maveth, "How are you doing?" "It is good to be back with the others. But I miss Raelia," he said as softly as he could. I cautioned the Goliath. "Castile has a spine spell, Maveth. Be careful what you say, even if you think you can't be overheard," I advised. He nodded in understanding. I have not said anything, even though Constantine and Adrian have pressed me for details of our time in the dungeon, he replied quietly as he gathered nuts into a pile. Castile expected me to track the company's food and supplies. I had forgotten that I was taking over for Delmar. The next 3 hours were spent reviewing each man's pack as I inventoried what we had. The biggest problem was that the dungeon meat needed to be smoked or eaten, or it would go bad in just 2 days. They did not have access to a dimensional space to preserve their meat, and many rooms did not have wood that burned well. As best I could project from what I counted, the group had 4 days' worth of food. It was not a balanced diet, but it was enough for plentiful meals. Each man was also now carrying a bundle of firewood from the Shadow Bear room. The reward chest had yielded only a few silver coins and a single lesser healing potion. I was now quite sure the dungeon had reduced the reward because there were 9 of us. I asked Castile this question. Do you think the dungeon reduced the reward? There were 9 of us when there should not have been more than 4. Castile thought about it while cracking nuts. I do not know. This is not my first dungeon, but it is much larger than any of which I have ever heard of. The largest dungeon I know of in the Telian Empire has 9 rooms total. Perhaps you are right. We can test your theory in the Weaver room. We spent half a day in the Shadow Bear room, and I learned how poorly off the company was. We had just 3 arrows left between Blaze and Constantine. Many buckles and straps on the armor were in bad shape. Half the men had holes in their socks and boots. Clothes were soiled and frayed. Bodies were filthy and unhygienic. Wiley had a nasty cough and a minor infection on his leg. Firth had 2 broken fingers, but at least his arm had been healed with a potion. But not a single one of them complained. Another apple for everyone could not hurt, so I added it to the meal after the work was done and before we moved out. Constantine happily ate his apple and casually asked, "How many more apples do you have?" "A few, but I was hoping to save them for Ginger rather than waste them on you lot," I retorted with good humor. Adrian let out a rare chuckle. "Damn, Eric, you like your horse better than the men you fight alongside." Adrian had been with me when I found Ginger injured, and the horse trader was going to use her for breeding stock. Adrian had allowed me to bring her back to Sobril and to have her healed. "Ginger just appreciates me more than you all," I grunted dismissively. That got some laughs, and everyone professed that they appreciated me very much as long as I had more apples. We moved on to the Weaver room. Constantine caught a glimpse of one of the black spiders. "The room is set. Same plan?" He looked at Castile. "No, it will just be Eric, Mavaith, Adrian, and myself. Eric thinks we will get better loot with fewer people." She nodded at me. "You can draw them out." I was going to be bait again. Mavith was behind me as I moved into the room, my boots sticking as I stepped forward. A lance of fire shot over my head into one of the cocoons. I turned to see Castile holding a new ebony wand. I set shields to hold the spray of webbing from reaching me or Mavith as Castile burned each cocoon. The spiders crashed to the stone floor as their webbing was destroyed. Adrian moved past me to attack the stunned spider. Mavith crushed a spider, and I killed my own, stabbing into its array of eyes. In less than a minute, the weavers were dispatched. Castile was smiling as she slid her fire wand back into her garments. She struggled to move across the floor to the chest. "Maybe," she indicated the chest. He moved to Castile's side with sticky steps and tapped the chest, shattering the stone. Castile studied the contents. Definitely more silver, and a levitation potion. "Last time we got a spider climb potion that we used to check the cocoons. Was there anything in them?" I asked, looking up at the smoldering balls. "No," Constantine said from behind me. The others moved into the room and it got very loud as they moved across the sticky floor. Firth swore as the sole of his boot came off. "Are we going to harvest the spinnerets?" I asked Castile. Castile was removing her collector from her pack. I could hear it scraping on the metal of the kettle of souls as she took it out. Adrian was almost to the opposite corridor. "No, they need to be preserved. These spider legs need to be boiled too. And we do not have the water to do that." Castile hissed in disappointment as the first spider yielded nothing with the collector. I asked, "Do you want me to handle this while you are getting everyone settled into the safe room?" Castile locked her eyes on mine and nodded, understanding in her gaze. "Yes, Eric, handle the spider harvest. We got 3 essences the first time through. Hopefully you have the same luck. Everyone else, let's get to the safe room. I pretended to have difficulty getting to the next spider to make sure everyone had left and was out of sight. I used my collector, and a minor coordination essence was formed. I then proceeded to get 3 more. I experimented with my dimensional space, cutting the chitin abdomen in half with the thin plane. It worked, and the organs oozed out of the bisected weaver. I dug out the spinneret and collected 2 more, giving me a total of 5 in my dimensional storage. I washed my hands of the evidence and joined the others. It looked like it was Constantine's turn to cook. I handed Castile's collector back to her along with the 3 of 4 coordination essences. She smiled as she took the collector. Firth, Constantine and Wiley, these are yours. Morale was high with the ease of the last 2 fights and essences. As everyone settled into the room, Castile, Adrian, and I talked in the corridor. How are we getting past the sand scarabs? Adrian inquired. I will go with Eric and Mavith and assess the situation, Castile decided. You are in charge of the men until we return. Adrian did not look happy. Bring a 4th man, Constantine or Firth. Castile shook her head. The 3 of us are fine. Have Constantine scout the raptor room and get everyone fed and rested. We are close to reuniting with our companions. Mavith and I walked with Castile to the sand room. When we reached it, she looked at me expectantly. I need to know what you can do, Eric. I looked at Mavith, then stepped out onto the sand. The dust devils moved toward me. I waited until they got close and targeted one of them. A puff of sand, and the swirling sand above the scarab dissipated, and I stepped back into the corridor before the others could reach me. Castile looked from me to the sand a few times, processing it. Mavith was watching to make sure the scarabs did not attack. Did you put the entire scarab in your dimensional space? Castile asked in disbelief. Do not answer that. Can you and Mavith clear the room by yourselves? Only if I drink my ether restoration potions. Otherwise, I have to wait about 40 minutes each time, I revealed. Castile's jaw dropped, her eyes wide. You have ether potions, as in plural. Castile was staring at me, her jaw practically unhinged. I asked innocently. Castile found her voice. Dungeon aether potions are almost impossible to get. Aether potions brewed by alchemists start to lose their efficacy immediately, and most alchemists lack the ether to infuse them properly. Yes, they are good, she rasped vehemently. I pulled out the potion from beneath my armor and handed it to her. Her eyes widened even further, if that was even possible. You do realize this is a greater ether potion, Eric? Once again, I asked. Is that good? With mock innocence. Is that good? She spat incredulously. This is a greater ether potion that could restore my ether 4 times over. Yeah, when I tried one, I felt a lot of the ether bleed off into the environment, I said casually, based on her reaction. These potions were obviously a sort of holy grail for mages. You drank one of these? Wasted it? A sip could have restored all your aether. She reached for the potion like I was not deserving of it, and I let her take it. She turned it over in her hand as if trying to determine if it was real. I shrugged. Well, I needed to know how it worked. How many of these do you have? Hunger was evident in her eyes. Which dungeon room did you find them in? Is it close? No, it is not close. It was a fire-bare room deep below, on the 3rd floor, I admitted. Castile regained her composure, her childlike excitement fading. She started to hand back the potion, but I declined. Keep it. You can make better use of it than me. I had another anyway, and the gift should endear Castile to me a little or a lot, just like the essences did for her and the company. Castile relaxed slightly. She held up the potion and explained slowly. Once the seal on a dungeon potion is broken, the air will degrade it. Use a little and seal it quickly again. It should last at least a few hours. She looked at me considering. Or if you store it right away in your dimensional space, it shouldn't lose any of its efficacy. She made me feel foolish for not realizing I did not need to drink the entire potion. You need to be careful when using these. It restores your ether but does not increase your aether resistance. Channel too much ether too quickly, and you will burn out your channels. Mavith watched the entire exchange and brought our attention back to the dungeon room. Are we not fighting the sand scarabs? Castile focused on me again and looked at the spot where the scarab dust devil had disappeared. The scarab. She wanted an answer. I didn't put an entire scarab in my dimensional space, I said vaguely. I was trying to give her an out from lying to the truth seekers if they asked her about this. Castile seemed to understand my piecemeal information. She looked at the sand where the scarab had been. A small crater of sand remained. I could tell she was trying to puzzle it out. She finally said, "Impossible." She had not directed it at me but simply spoke to the sand. Castile was still deep in thought when footfalls behind us announced Adrian's approach. He came and stood with us, looking into the sandscape room. "Did you come up with a plan to draw out the scarabs?" he asked while watching the mini tornadoes with us. I waited for Castile to answer him. "Eric and Maveth have some interesting ideas. It should not require anyone else in the company. Get the men ready to clear the raptor room. I will join you in a moment." Adrian looked at all three of us in turn. He did not say anything before nodding to Castile, turning on his heel, and returning to the group. Once he was gone, Castile spoke. "It will take us 3 hours to take down the 3 raptors in the room. We will be gathering water from a stream there, but the raptors have very little meat. You want us to remain here? To figure out a way to handle the scarabs?" I asked rhetorically. Castile nodded and moved to follow Adrian's path. She slipped the ether potion inside her garments as she left us. We watched her go, and Maveth's deep voice rumbled quietly. "She was stunned, Eric. Yeah, now that we are back with the group, I can't keep it from her. I don't think she's going to be able to shield me from the others for long. Constantine is clearly curious how we managed to wander the dungeon by ourselves, as is Adrian." I sighed heavily as I watched the swirling sand move in the room. We were quiet for a while. I was relieved that most of the company was well, and that the Kettle of Souls was close. We both watched the sand because the scarabs could leave the room at any time, since I had already killed one of their number. A few times the swirling sand got close, but never breached the corridor. I stood as soon as I had enough aether to use my dimensional space again. I waited while the nearest scarab dashed toward me, and I killed it at 10 feet. I quickly stepped off the sand and onto the stone of the corridor. The other 3 scarabs rushed to the scene and passed their dead comrade. This time we did not have to wait to kill a 3rd scarab as all 3 left the protection of the sand to attack us in the corridor. The dog-sized, 6-legged beetles rushed us, 2 abreast. Maveth crushed the first one while I fenced with a second. The beetle was using its mandibles to prevent my black blade from scoring a piercing strike. The 3rd beetle was crawling over Maveth's foe while I struggled with mine. "Deal with the 3rd one," I barked at Maveth. My opponent matched my reach, and I did not want to overextend myself between its mandibles. Maveth had superior reach, and I was soon splattered with clear fluid as Maveth's hammer descended on the 3rd beetle. It was not long before Maveth's hammer also finished off my stubborn opponent. I looked at Maveth, who did not have any splatter on him. I had thick, clear mucus all over my armor. "I just got all the webbing off, and now I am slimed," I complained, wiping away the goo. "The first time we fought the scarabs, I got through unscathed. At least the fluid was odorless." Maveth could not help but chuckle at my overreaction. "Go dig the 2 scarabs out of the sand. We need to stage the area." I growled without malice at the Goliath. "Stage?" Maveth questioned. "We're going to make it look like we tricked the scarabs out of the sand to kill them." Maveth nodded in understanding and set to the task. I kept an eye on the corridor while the Goliath worked. With my eye on the corridor, I first used the collector on the scarab that gave me the most trouble. A major earth essence formed. The other 3 scarabs yielded minor earth essences. With the scarabs freed from the sand, I had Maveth crush them with his hammer near the corridor. His ferocious attacks concealed the fist-sized holes through their exoskeletons. Maveth surveyed the work. "It looks like I killed all the scarabs, Eric." That was true, as his hammer had crushed each of them. He was also eyeing the stone chest in the center of the room. "Well, leave the chest for when the others get here. That way, they won't think we took anything. And tell them you smashed all the scarabs, Maveth." This chamber was hotter than the others, and we were both sweating profusely. I was also covered in sand. As the clear scarab blood dried on my armor, it became embedded with sand. I looked ridiculous. Mavis agreed, but after half an hour, he asked, "Should we go check on them?" "No, Castile gave us 3 hours to get the scarabs. They should be here soon. We would just wait." We had some apple slices with appleberry jam. Half an hour later, Constantine arrived first. He grunted from the corridor, announcing his presence as he inspected the scarabs in the corridor, and then the 2 remaining sand scarabs in the room. He walked over to Mavis and me, lounging by the unopened stone chest. He looked down at us. "How did you get the scarabs to come out of the sand?" I squinted at him, as this room was brighter than most. "I lured them out. They could not reach me if I stood on my air shield." Mavis smashed them with his hammer. Mavis said nothing but showed Constantine his hammer, backing up my story. Constantine considered my statement, probably assessing its legitimacy before nodding. "Smart," was all he said before landing in the sand next to us and taking an apple. Wiley and Firth were next into the room, commenting on the size of the scarabs between them. Firth noticed the stone chest first. "Why didn't you crack this open?" He sauntered up to it, doing the honors. "Huh," he voiced loudly, causing me to twist and look. Among the typical silver was a black stone goblet. The last time we got a spell book, and I had assumed it would be something similar this time. Firth picked up the silver coins in the goblet. Castile and the others arrived, impressed with the room already being cleared. Firth announced as if he had cleared the room himself. "Found a black cup in the chest. What do you think it is?" "What do you think it is?" He held it out to Castile. Castile arched her eyebrow at Mavis and me before taking the cup. She turned it over in her hands. No visible runic script. She studied it for a moment while the company circled around her. "I believe it is made from a single piece of black jade. Goblet artifacts typically transmute liquids placed in them." "Well, let's try it out," Firth said eagerly. "Maybe it gives us some quality ale." Castile looked over at me. Mavis and Eric cleared the room. "It is theirs to do with as they please, as long as the dukes do not find out he has it," Constantine announced to the company. "It was for our benefit to make sure they kept the secret." Castile handed me the goblet. It was quite heavy and shaped like a large wine cup. Firth held out his water skin and began pouring water into it. Uninvited, it overflowed and splashed on me. I channeled ether into the cup, and it greedily took my offering. It took more ether than I needed to open my dimensional space to activate. Firth was leaning over me, sniffing loudly and studying the liquid in the cup. "How can you smell anything when you smell that bad?" I pulled the cup away from the nosy legionnaire. It was hard to tell if the liquid in the chalice had changed color since it was black. I sniffed it myself. The water had definitely turned into an alcoholic beverage, not beer or wine, though. I tipped the goblet, spilling the contents into the sand. It was an amber liquid. "Don't waste it." Firth moved to stop me. "Leave it, Firth," Castile barked. "It could be poisoned." "Eric, it is best not to sample it until a scroll of revelation is used on it." She nodded at me, and I made the empty black chalice vanish. Still bent over, Firth picked up the wet sand and inhaled deeply. "That is whiskey, or I'm a goblin, sire." Constantine looked over. "I've seen the women at some of the brothels you frequent, Firth. That statement might just ring true." "Ah, if only this dungeon had a brothel room, then I could be content spending the rest of my days here," Firth said in jest. Some of the men chuckled at the back and forth, and Castile took out her collector and went to work on the scarabs, but she didn't get a single essence. Adrian lamented the lack of luck. Those were elemental creatures, would have had a chance at an affinity essence. Next time, get Castile as soon as all the creatures are killed. Castile rallied everyone. "Come on, the work in this room is already done. Our companions are close." The group of us were soon moving down the corridor toward the harpy room. The deadwood trees and coffee berry trees were familiar as Adrian Castile, and I stood at the entrance to the room. The 2 hideous harpies hopped from branch to branch upon noticing us, their perfect chests bobbing, Adrian muttered. "We should just stick Firth on them. They'd run away." His uncharacteristic attempt at humor fell flat. Castile ordered the men behind us, 2 harpies. "Block your ears with what you have. This should not be too difficult. I will disable their wings." The company started going through their packs, shoving bits of cloth, nuts, and other objects in their ears to mute the harpies' song. It wasn't long before we were ready. Castile stepped into the room first. Wisps of black smoke unfurled from her extended hands. The harpies did not even get close before Castile entangled their wings. and they crashed to the ground. Constantine was the first to reach one of the harpies, and Adrian and Firth reached the second. A few well-placed strikes and it was over. Wiley tried one of the coffee berries on the trees and spat in disgust. "I hate this ogre's ass of a dungeon. Berries should not taste this bad." "Don't jinx us," Blaze said, picking one of the berries himself. "It's a cava berry. Don't eat the skin or the seed. Just eat the flesh." He demonstrated this by squeezing the berry to shoot out the seed. He then consumed the flesh and discarded the skin. Not bad. The seeds are used to make a drink called cava from the south. "Do you know how to prepare the beans?" I asked as I moved to try the berry's flesh myself. It tasted like a mix of cherry and watermelon, extremely refreshing. "No, my father had a small shop in Brapo. He traded in cheap exotic goods. I've seen these before. I know the seeds need to be roasted for cava, but I'm not familiar with the process." Blaze was picking and eating the fruit, and soon the entire company was. Castile moved to the harpy and produced her collector. She eyed me briefly before using it and getting a minor charm affinity. The second harpy yielded the same. Firth had once again taken the opportunity to shatter the reward chest by the pool. "There are fish in this pond," he noted as he excitedly dug through the coins. "Just some silver in the chest." I thought that was odd since there had always been something in addition to the coins in the chests. If Firth had taken something, no one noticed. I moved to the pond myself, and was glad to see the dungeon had cleaned it since my last dip. Firth was already removing his armor. I think he was more focused on the fish than taking an actual bath. He might actually have success catching them since they had to bob to the surface to breathe. Matteo was stripping his armor to join him. From across the room, Lurkin exclaimed joyously, "Are you all having a party without us?" Everyone went silent and turned to see the cook standing by himself. He probably came to check on the harpy room for his group. Matteo, already swimming in the pool, laughed. "You're only invited if you do the cooking." Lurkin entered the room, all smiles, to talk with Castile. He looked malnourished, but his eyes were filled with the joy of seeing us. I joined them to learn how they had connected with Flavius and the others. Castile immediately asked, "Who is with you?" "There's a safe room down the corridor," he pointed behind him. "Flavius, Brutus, Dante, Benito, Linus, Calm, and the scholar are there." The men moved into crowd Lurkin, even the naked Matteo and Firth, who had not bothered to dress. Blaze interrupted and asked earnestly, "What about Pavel and Lucian?" The joy left Lurkin's face. "I don't think they made it. I know they didn't make it." Adrian moved to stand in front of Lurkin, grabbing his pauldron firmly. "What happened?" he demanded softly. Lurkin collapsed a bit, overwhelmed by the memory. "A few days ago, maybe 4. It's hard to tell time in this cursed dungeon. I was resting in the safe room where we arrived from the tavern with Lucian, Benito, and Pavel." He took a deep breath. We didn't leave a watch, and were all sleeping. Constantine rebuked him harshly from nearby. "Why not?" Lurkin defended himself aggressively. "Every day was the same. After weeks, we just assumed we were safe." His anger fell, and he softly added, "We got complacent." Castile calmed everyone with a look and then encouraged Lurkin to continue. "Tell us how it happened, Lurkin. A troll. A crusty-ass, shit-brown troll. If it hadn't been so loud storming down the corridor, we would all been killed right there." Benito, even with his arm broken and useless, confronted it. He gave us time to form a defense, but took a nasty slash to his face. Lurkin paused, recalling the nightmarish incident. We formed up, protecting Benito with the dungeon exit behind us. We hoped to trick the troll into the portal, but an ice drake emerged from the corridor, and an elven wizard was just behind the drake. Someone inhaled sharply at the confirmation the summoner had joined us in the dungeon. It was the summoner, then. "He has an ice drake under his control." "I have seen it," Castile confirmed calmly to everyone. Lurkin nodded at Castile. "Why, Cheo?" "We figured fighting the specters was better than fighting the troll and the ice drake." We were going to enter the dungeon again together right after exiting, but the troll followed us through the portal. Everyone was silent as Lurkin continued his retelling. "There were a lot of specters on the other side and frozen body parts of legionnaires. The troll pushed us back from the gate, and Benito tried to hold off the specters with his good arm, but could barely stand. He sighed as he replayed the final part of his tale. Lucien said he would distract the troll away from the portal, so we could get back through together. Pavel joined him without being ordered, telling me to drag Benito back in. Pavel got 2 arrows into the troll, and it charged him and Lucien. I saw specters swarming Pavel, and the troll tackled Lucien to the ground near the collapsed tavern. That was the last I saw of them before I got Benito back into the dungeon. Fortunately, we arrived in a safe room close to Flavius and the others. There was dead silence as we all absorbed the mental weight of more losses to the company. Adrian broke the somber mood. Let's reunite with the others. We can mourn our fallen comrades together. Make use of the pool first, Castile said numbly. Everyone bathe. 2 legionnaires at both corridor entrances. Lurkin, Constantine, and Adrian. Go bring the others here. It was not long before the pool was filled with men splashing each other like children while trying to catch the bobbing fish. Adrian returned with the others. The scholar and Colm were supporting Benito. His cheek and neck had a filthy bandage with dried blood. Linus had a splinted leg but was walking under his own power. It looked like Dante had recovered from the spider's poison. The groups mingled, and smiles and laughter were all around, pushing the reality of our lost companions to the back of our minds. When I got close to Benito, he smelled like death and ammonia. He was still smiling, even though he was obviously close to Pluto's realm. I patted Benito on the back. It looks like a troll got a hold of you and took your maidenhood. Benito's eyes were a bit glossy as he replied, I gave just as good as I got, Eric. You wouldn't happen to have any wine left to numb the pain a bit? He asked hopefully. I pretended to think about it. I do have a bottle left, but I thought you might want this instead. I held up one of the greater healing potions I had left. His eyes had trouble focusing on it, and I do not think he understood. Castile snapped at him. Drink it if you want to live, boy. That's a greater dungeon healing potion. Ah, you don't happen to have another for me? Linus asked jokingly. Maveth moved to retrieve one of his potions, but I gave him a look, and he stopped. I retrieved the lesser healing potion I had gotten from Raelia's bags, and offered it to Linus, who was flummoxed as I handed it to him. He rasped out, It should work as long as the bone is aligned closely. How many healing potions do you have? Matteo intruded on the gift-giving, thankfully clothed this time. He pretended to pat me down. I knew revealing the potions had risks, but neither Benito nor Linus would be able to flee with us once we left the dungeon. I pushed away the handsy Matteo. Just one left now. I'd prefer to save it for a real emergency if you don't mind. I watched as Benito got help from Scholar Fabian to drink the healing potion. A loud pop had Benito wince as his forearm bones aligned properly. He started coughing up yellow phlegm and tearing off his crusty bandages next as he seated himself on the ground. He soon lay spread eagle, breathing deeply, as if it was the first time in a long while he'd been able to do so. Benito's skin was filthy with sweat, dirt, and recently flaked scabs. The first words out of his mouth were, I am famished. What's for dinner? A tingly feeling of satisfaction went through me. I missed Linus taking the other potion, but he had also removed his splint and was practically skipping around the coffee berry trees. For some reason I channeled my inner Delmar. Okay, now that everyone is mobile, I need a full accounting of the provisions. I want 4 men picking berries and 4 men fishing. Everyone looked at me strangely for a moment before Castile backed me up. You heard Eric. Everything needs to be harvested before the dungeon reclaims the room, and I want everyone to bathe. I am sick of my eyes watering from your stench when I try to sleep. She let out a slight smirk and winked at the men before returning to her usual demeanor. As the men paired off and started to work, I did not like that Constantine and Flavius moved off to guard one of the corridors at Adrian's orders. Adrian began making the rounds to check on the men, and I joined him. Adrian had always been more interested in morale than Delmar had. But I was not Delmar, and I wanted to know how everyone was doing. We still had a number of injuries among the men. Firth had broken fingers. Dante was weak from the after effects of the poison. Benito still had a fever, even though his body was healed. And Colm had bruised ribs, but Willie's leg infection was at least clearing up. I gave Benito one of the 2 cure disease potions I had purchased at the Adventurers Guild in Telha. That immediately normalized his temperature and apparently healed his mouth, as Benito suddenly could not stop talking. Several people noted privately that I should have waited a bit longer before saving his life. Soon after, we abandoned the Harpy room and made the walk to the safe room Flavius and his group had been using. Everyone smelled mildly better, and we were mostly in good spirits. I stood, listening to Flavius report to Castile once the group had settled in the familiar-style safe room. The dungeon exit loomed nearby, enticing us with its offer of freedom. The lump in Castile's backpack was the key to that freedom. It might have been just me, but Flavius' eyes kept roaming to me while he talked. There is a large earth drake room down the other corridor from the Harpy room, but I assume Eric has already told you that. He has, Castile said firmly. What is this way? She indicated the only other exit from the safe room. Wolf spiders in the first room. They are just large, hairy bastards, but their venom lingers for days. Beyond that room are giant centipedes. They have a paralyzing toxin, but there are only 4 of them. Beyond that is the safe room where we arrived. Neither of the rooms offered a decent food source. We have been killing the harpies every 2 or 3 days for the fish. We did not know the berries were edible. Linus tried them whole and ended up vomiting an hour later. Flavius waited while Castile considered the information. And what is beyond that safe room? Castile questioned. Flavius held up his hands to draw a map in the air. 2 other corridors. One goes this way to a ferocious owlbear with glowing red eyes. He shifted his hands. The other goes this way for a long distance to a water-filled room with giant snapping turtles. We considered trying that room, as the turtles might have been too slow to pursue us in the corridor. I decided against it, thinking there might be other threats in the murky water that could follow us. This dungeon is a bloody menagerie, Adrian spat. I don't think it is worth exploring those rooms, Castile decided. We will rest for a day and then make our exit. To where? Flavius inquired. Castile looked a little irritated at the question. We will try to return to the Undercity and back to the library to avoid the concentration of specters in the city. From there we can clear the snow to the gates and get outside the aura of the city, Castile explained. What about the elven summoner? Flavius pressed. He made a mistake following us into the dungeon and dismissing his elementals. Without his constant control of the weather, I am guessing the snow is now passable. Flavius was not as certain. We cannot be sure of that. Castile's patience ran out. Enough, Flavius. You and Blaze can watch the wolf spider room for the approach of the summoner. Do not engage if you see him or his creatures. Just retreat here to report, so we can prepare. Adrian added stiffly, Be aware, he has been using goblins as scouts as well. Flavius nodded curtly and turned away from our group. Once he was far away, Adrian spoke to Castile and me. He's been leading the men for weeks, and has become bolder. Clearly he has won over Brutus and is working on Constantine. Do you think he will be a problem? Castile asked. Adrian hesitated a little. Maybe. Constantine told me he was asking about how Eric and Nevaith reconnected with us. Adrian had an amused look on his face. It made me look to Castile and back to Adrian. Castile had obviously shared something with him. I should have realized it when he was no longer suspicious of me. Shitty hoped this would not bite me later. Castile watched Blaze and Flavius move down the corridor. Blaze will let us know if he's up to anything. She turned to me. Do you and Maveth want to scout the Harpy or Earth Drake room? We will be leaving the dungeon when you return. I was puzzled for just a moment. I was pretty sure she was asking if I wanted to harvest more essence. I considered the offer. I had dozens of essences in my dimensional space. But magic affinities were rare. Charm or earth essence. We can watch for the summoner in the Earth Drake corridor, I finally said. Castile nodded approvingly. A short while later, as I was getting ready to leave, Brutus offered to join us. Thankfully, Lurkin suddenly needed help preparing meals, so Adrian volunteered Brutus to help. Maveth and I walked back down the corridor to the Earth Drake room. We stood at the entrance to the chamber. The familiar draconic beast stirred and thundered a challenging roar at us, like it remembered that I was responsible for its past deaths. Maveth grunted, I don't think it likes you very much. I looked down the long corridor behind us and then back at the drake. It's going to like me a lot less in a few seconds. The Earth Drake yielded a major Earth essence while Nevaith watched the corridor. Maveth helped me drag the drake's long neck around to face away from the corridor, making it look as if the drake was sleeping in case someone came by. The reward chest was much smaller this time, so I was not expecting another spear inside. It rattled with coins as I picked it up and carried it behind the drake. I shattered the stone chest, using the drake's body to shield my actions. Inside were a few dozen silver coins and a pair of thick, brown bracers. The soft, flexible leather covered from wrist to elbow, with laces to tighten them. I let Maveth try them on, but his forearms were too large for them. If these bracers were an artifact, they would neither resist nor absorb ether from me. I sent the bracers to my dimensional storage to figure them out later. With our work in the room complete, Maveth asked, "Are we going to descend and attack the boars again?" I had considered going by myself, but I shook my head. No. We'll just wait until it's time to leave the dungeon. Linus or Benito will forget us when it's time. I slid down the wall to relax in the corridor with Maveth. Maveth smiled brightly. "Do you want to play checkers?" I nodded absently as he set up the board between us. "When will you release Realia?" he asked after winning the third straight game. I hesitated before answering. When it's safe. It might be some time before I can get away from the company." I reset my pieces on the board, and we continued to pass the time. Hours later, the pounding of boots and the rattle of Legion armor echoed down the corridor. Benito was running full tilt at us, using the wall to slow himself. The summoner was spotted across the owlbear room. "We're leaving now." He turned and sprinted back the way he came without waiting for a response. Maveth was trying to put the checkers set in the bag. "Leave it, Maveth." I pulled him up, and we started running back to the safe room. Of course, we were the furthest away and probably the last to be warned. Benito, the little rabbit, was already gone as we raced down the corridor after shouldering our packs. Thoughts raced through my mind. How much would the owlbear slow down the summoner? Would the summoner figure out that we had exited the dungeon? I glanced down the right corridor toward the harpy room. Seeing and hearing no one, I assumed they had already retreated, and we were the last ones left. Moments later, I saw the small safe room and the legionnaires preparing to enter the exit portal. A piercing screech echoed down the corridor. Castile's voice cut through the noise with an order. "Into the gate! Runic weapons lead! The summoner has controlled the owlbear. It's coming!" Clinking red-armored men scrambled forward into the exit portal ahead of us. Almost everyone was through when we emerged into the safe room. A hulking bipedal owl burst into the room from the opposite corridor. Its over-muscled body was incongruent with its massive owl head. The beak alone was as large as a man's head. And when it screeched again, sharp, jagged teeth lined the impressive beak. Castile's etheric shadow chains swarmed over the creature, trying to contain it, but they snapped like spider threads. Castile, Adrian, and Calm were the only legionnaires left in the room. "Get through the portal," I yelled, not for any heroic reason, but so I could use my abilities without being seen. Castile nodded, understanding my intent. "Move. Eric will occupy it with his air shields and follow us momentarily." Maveth roared his own challenge, and the creature looked confused as Castile, Calm, and Adrian disappeared into the portal. I stepped within range of the owlbear, and it spun toward me. A foreign intelligence burned in its red eyes, the summoner trying to control the feral beast. I removed a good portion of its chest cavity, my power overwhelming its resistance. The beast belched a spray of blood at me and charged on all fours. Fuck, I must have missed something vital. Maveth stepped in front of me, lowering his hammer. The owlbear's powerful beak clamped down just as Maveth's hammer connected. A portion of Maveth's stomach, leather armor, and abdomen were torn away. I pressed my blade into the creature's shoulder as it chewed its reward. Maveth stumbled back, leaking blood and bile from a gaping stomach wound. The pain drew the creature's attention to me, while Maveth fumbled for his potions. The owlbear, frothy blood dripping from its beak, stumbled toward me. It was close to death, but I must have hit the lungs instead of the heart. I reached under my armor for the ether potion. I only needed a sip to recover all my ether. The owlbear clumsily lunged toward me in slow motion, giving me plenty of time to sidestep. It was its final act as the massive creature collapsed. I took a swig of the potion, capped it, and sent it to my dimensional space as my ether core was replenished. I kneeled next to Maveth while scanning the corridor. A large splotch of pink skin denoted his injury, which was slowly turning gray to match the rest of his body. "Did you take all your healing potions?" I asked, inspecting the wound. A deep dent in his abdomen showed where the owlbear had taken a bite. Mavis nodded painfully. I produced my last greater healing potion and handed it to him. The ether from the previous potions hadn't been enough to repair the extensive damage. Mavis rasped. "It's coming." He pointed painfully down the corridor. I spun around to see a creature bounding toward us. It must have been the summoner's ice drake. The scales shimmered, appearing like undulating ice as it rushed closer. I wasn't concerned, as I had enough ether to deal with it. "Mavaith, get into the portal and help the company with the specters." Mavaith groaned as he stood unsteadily. He seemed to be missing some musculature, as he had difficulty moving. Hopefully, the greater healing potion would restore the soft tissue. The ice drake skidded to a stop at the entrance, its crystalline eyes showing intelligence as it assessed the situation. Seeing only one legionnaire and a struggling Goliath, the drake paused. I backed up toward the portal, making sure Mavaith made it through. The serpentine neck of the drake slowly locked eyes with me, its gaze intense. I wondered if the summoner was controlling or viewing through it. The black, oily surface enveloped Mavaith, sending him to the others in the ruins. The ice drake took a tentative step into the room, eyes locked on mine. If it had a ranged breath attack, I would retreat. If it got within 15 feet, I would end it. The room was only 30 feet across, but the drake paused, puffing frosted air in annoyance at me. The sound of soft footfalls behind the drake had me shift my focus to the corridor. The summoner was coming. The slow, dramatic pace of his walk made time seem to stretch. The tall, aged elf entered the room, standing behind his drake. He rested a hand on its crown, stroking it. I pulled the ether potion back into my free hand, relaxing my grip on the black blade, letting it point at the ground to appear unthreatening. The high mage summoner surveyed the room, his eyes lingering on the dead owlbear before looking up at me. "Did you kill the dire owlbear, Legionnaire?" I was a little shocked. Did he not recognize me? Should I be insulted? I thought he would remember me from when he looked through the wyvern's eyes. He had sworn to kill me. "Maybe," I replied evenly. His eyes brightened as he studied me, and a flash of recognition appeared on his face. The void mage, his voice hardened. "Do not come any closer." He studied my dilapidated and mangled legion armor, a delighted smile forming. "It looks like you have had a rough time in the dungeon." I was trying to decide what to do. I could argue that I was not a void mage. I could drop Raylia in his lap and hope she convinced him not to attack. Or I could escape by taking one step back and joining the company. Instead, I asked, "Why did you follow us into the dungeon?" The summoner smiled maliciously. "You are ignorant of the goings-on in the world. I was running out of time for my revenge, as I was ordered to return. Your empire thinks it can hoard the secrets of the ancient titans. We cannot let them have it, as it would tip the balance of power too much. I figured I might be able to draw out more information if I kept the conversation going. So, they found Atlantium?" Treliorn raised an eyebrow at my knowledge. "You are no ordinary legionnaire, a Praetorian agent then. For whom? I will be sure to let them know you will not be returning to their service." His dark humor attempted to mimic mine. I chuckled as he dug for information. "No, I serve no one. I am a conscript forced to join. Being a legionnaire was not by choice." "You lie, legionnaire." The mage's voice suddenly turned angry. Damn, the summoner was a truth-seeker as well this time. I felt the spell like spiders crawling over my skin. My sensitivity to either had increased in the dungeon. I elaborated with the truth. After I was convicted of a crime and sentenced, I was given the choice of hard labor or the army. I chose the army. The elf nodded slowly, accepting my answer. He considered and shrugged. "It matters not. You killed Veril. My pursuit of vengeance has cost me much, but the knowledge and rewards of this fascinating dungeon have made up for it. And now you are trapped." A devilish smile formed on his face. A cold realization spread through me. I reached behind, expecting the dungeon exit's embrace, but I felt only a smooth, solid surface. I quickly looked back. The oily wall was still there, but something akin to my air shield blocked my exit. I was actually impressed that the mage had managed to cast the spell at such a distance, nearly 30 feet. He had more tricks than just summoning creatures. "Perhaps we can bargain. Would you let me go in exchange for the Griffin Rider? If I could eliminate the Ice Drake, I might be able to race to the Earth Drake room and use the exit at the bottom of the stairs. Rielia is a prisoner? I will inform her brother when I return. He can launch an expedition if he wishes, the mage said, unconcerned with the young elf's fate. It felt like the mage was toying with me, savoring his victory. I slowly raised my dark blade into a defensive posture. The Ice Drake immediately tensed, sensing a battle was coming. Kilma, relax. This one is mine. 7 arcane missiles formed over his shoulder and shot toward me. I hastily erected air shields in front of me. The 2 shields shattered under the force, and the 7th missile burned a hole through my severely damaged armor. My flesh burned where the missile struck, and the smell of burnt flesh reminded me I was facing a powerful mage. Are we not full of surprises? His unfriendly smile returned. Too many to count, I retorted reflexively. If you have a few hours, perhaps we can discuss them. The mage sighed. Unfortunately, I do not have time for banter. I need to eliminate the rest of your company and confront your emperor. It was time to go. I dashed to the right, aiming for the corridor. The Ice Drake exhaled a cloud of frost, but it wasn't nearly as powerful as the ice salamander's attack. It merely washed over me. I left an air shield behind, blocking the corridor. A torrent of lightning crashed into it, superheating the shield until it exploded, throwing me tumbling down the corridor. My ears rang, and I thought to myself that this most definitely was not a fair fight. I activated my healing spell form and coughed in pain. I stumbled to my feet as the mage's muted shout registered. No, Kilma! I glanced back to see the mage had warned the drake against pursuing me, but the beast's hunting instinct had taken over. It saw me beaten and sprawled on the floor, and it rushed toward me, eager to finish me off. The headless ice drake's body skidded into me. My head felt stuffed with cotton, my ears throbbed, and I stumbled to my feet and ran. The mage's wails of anger echoed as I shuffled down the corridor. I fumbled with the cap of the ether potion and drank more than I intended in my haste. I immediately began directing the ether to heal my injuries. My head started to clear. The body of the ice drake should slow the mage down. Suddenly, I was shoved hard from behind by multiple impacts. Arcane bolts sizzled into my armor, creating burning holes and reaching my flesh. This was not a fair fight if I could not get close to the damned elven summoner to remove his head. 2 of the strikes hit the back of my thighs, scorching my hamstrings and making my escape even more difficult as my legs struggled to work properly. I could really use that greater healing potion I gave Maveth right about now. I pulled out the last lesser healing potion I took from Rielia and drank it. It did not help much with my extensive injuries, but it did close my wounds. The minor numbing and cooling effect across my skin was also welcome. I had other potions and drank one of the major stamina potions. It collided with the remnants of the healing potion in my stomach, creating a burning, nauseous sensation. Maybe mixing potions was not a good idea, but the warm, revitalizing energy flooded my damaged body, allowing me to break into a run. The pain faded like a bad memory. Though I knew I would be in a world of hurt once the potion wore off, I did not look back for the summoner as I turned into the corridor leading to the Earth Drake. The Earth Drake lay dead, just as we had left it. I was halfway across the large chamber, just past the Drake, when I slammed into an invisible wall. The jarring halt to my sprint sent me bouncing backward, landing hard on the dirt-covered floor. I scrambled back to use the Drake's body as cover. I thought I had broken my nose, as blood flowed freely across my lips and down my chin, and I spat out the metallic taste. When things settled, I panted heavily. "You're fast for an old man," I said in my limited Elvish, hoping to confuse him. Instead, he laughed. "You are butchering a beautiful language, Legionnaire. Just another reason you have to die." There was madness, anger, and condescension in his tone. I thought I had done a fairly respectable job speaking it. I was not going to talk my way out of this, and he would not let me escape. Rielia would probably side with the summoner if I brought her out. I doubted the goblin would be much help, maybe a distraction at best. I retrieved the black-tipped spear, the spider-engraved short sword, and another greater stamina potion from my dimensional space. I gripped the spear, my only weapon that could be used as a ranged weapon. "I'm sorry about your ice drake, but she did not seem to be in a playful mood," I taunted, hoping to provoke him into making a mistake. But I immediately regretted my words. Fly does not antagonize the spider when caught. Kilma was a dear friend, using his voice as my guide. I stood and hurled the spear at the summoner. He waved his right hand, and I saw the flash of a spell form. He was a skilled mage, creating spells almost instantly and with just one hand. The spear thudded into another invisible wall, causing an echo in the room. I ducked back behind the carcass of the earth drake. This was not going well. The spear was my only ranged weapon unless I wanted to start throwing purple potatoes at him. His imperious voice echoed in the room. "Did you kill this earth drake as well?" I suppose it was not much more difficult than a wyvern. There was an amused tone, as it was clear he had me cornered. His quick shifts in emotion worried me, and he might have lost his grip on sanity. Feeling the effects of the stamina potion fading, I drank the second one while the standoff continued. It was a struggle to keep the potion down. Drinking so many potions in such a short time was probably not wise. With the black blade in one hand and the spider blade in the other, I planned to rush for the exit. I hoped that whatever invisible wall he had put up, I could destroy it with the two runic weapons, then descend the stairs to the safe room and escape the dungeon. I took a deep breath and released my distraction, my aether getting dangerously low. The goblin did not cooperate. Instead of running and pulling the summoner's attention, it was disoriented and tried to hide under the earth drake's body, squeezing itself into the ground in a desperate attempt to disappear. Shit. The goblin was useless, or maybe just smarter than me, considering the situation. No time had passed for it, and it had been paralyzed with fear when I returned it to my dimensional space. I pushed off the floor, my blades extended, and searched for the invisible wall. The black blade made contact first, and I swung the spider blade overhead. The wall had a slight reverberation to it. I attacked in a berserk frenzy, and the spider blade drew on my aether with each strike, draining me dangerously. I never defeated the wall. Instead, the world lit up as energy surged around me. Lightning engulfed me, forcing my muscles to clench and straining my joints painfully. When the lightning stopped, all I could smell was burnt flesh, and my vision was blurry. I groaned and rolled on the dirt, trying to focus on healing my eyes and ears while ignoring the pain. The soft shuffle of feet reached my ears. The mage was approaching. I continued to moan pitiful. Did not take much effort and hoped the mage would come within 10 feet. Through my bloodshot eyes, I saw the hem of the summoner's dark blue robes. Then, the bastard stopped 20 feet away. I had expected some gloating speech, and was not disappointed. Legionnaire. The goblin took that moment to scramble over the drake and flee the one-sided battle. The mage turned toward the noise, and I rolled to my knees, planted my foot, and lunged toward him. My body protested the rapid movement, but I just needed to get close enough. I focused on the mage's head and tried to send it to my dimensional space. My veins began to burn with an uncomfortable intensity, warning me of being overtaxed. I had been pushing my aether reserves for the last several minutes, refilling and depleting them repeatedly. Castile had warned me about the risk of burning out my aether channels, and my body was telling me I was getting close. But it did not matter because I had won. Then came the backlash of Caelor's resistance. Not only did his head remain, but it felt as though mine had been severed. Time seemed to slow as I fell to the ground. I flung the spider blade at the mage, who was turning to face me again. His aether shield flared, but the runic weapon penetrated it enough to cut into the hand he had put up to block it. The cut was not deep, but I would have laughed if I were not in such a tremendous amount of pain. I fumbled inside my armor for the aether potion, only to find that the vial had cracked, leaving me with wet dirt. I sucked on the dirty vial, trying to get even a drop of the restorative potion, but all I got was grit and crunchiness in my mouth, and just a hint of aether. Caelor moved slowly toward me. I was helpless and could only watch. He bent down to pick up the spider blade, more interested in it than in finishing me off. As he examined the blade, his face twisted with concern. His eyes moved from the blade to me, and he spoke. A mage assassin, then. I would have never guessed it by your looks, boy. Still, I do not need magic to deal with you. He expertly spun the short blade in his hand, then frowned. His eyes hardened, and he attacked. I was weaponless, my black blade a dozen steps behind me. I pulled one of the firebear pelts from my dimensional space, using it as a momentary shield. From this minuscule expenditure of ether, my veins felt as if they were filled with acid. I scrambled back to retrieve my long black blade. It worked, and I stood facing the irate summoner. Although standing might be too strong a word, he could barely force my body to an upright position. Caelora did not hesitate and rushed me, the short spider blade dancing dangerously in his skilled hands. The exchange was fast. I thought myself an equal swordsman, but I was heavily injured, and he scored a light slash on the back of my hand, parting the flesh and exposing the tendon underneath. I moved to create some distance and tried to heal the wound. Nothing. I could not feel my tiny amount of ether in my core or any ether at all. It was slippery as I tried to command it. The summoner smirked. Not so fun when it happens to you. The spider blade had a grimy, oily coating. It must have been what blocked my access to ether. That, or it emptied my ether core. The pause in our fight gave me a chance to ask a question. Is it permanent? It is your blade, Legionnaire. Do you not know what a Magebane is? He narrowed his eyes, suspicious that I might be trying to trick him. He obviously was not going to tell me much, but I figured he would be angrier if it was permanent. Suddenly the goblin dashed out, and both of us turned to watch. It had circled back and picked up the spear, struggling with its weight. I thought it might help me, but instead it ran off with the spear down the corridor toward the dead owlbear. The summoner looked bemused by my shock. Caelora shifted his stance, removing his robes in a flourish to give himself greater movement. I drew my belt knife in my offhand as we circled each other. He took a side stance to reduce his profile, while I angled mine to bring the dagger into play. We engaged again, my joints protesting at the required speed. Not just a mage, then? I asked after a few exchanges, sporting several slashes on my armor. I had the longer reach, yet I was losing. He probably had centuries of practice, and my dreamscape amulet was showing just how effective it was at focusing my training. But it was ultimately insufficient against his experience and my injuries. The elf smirked, speaking in Latin for the first time. I have kept fit through the centuries, training with some of the best rangers in Bartaradia. I can usually hold my own with a blade, but you are not unskilled. I acknowledged the compliment with a nod. He did not allow me to rest and moved to engage again. Slowly, I started to feel and hint at control of my aether core, again the poison from the spider blade wearing off. If his aether returned, I was doomed. The problem was that Caelora was not giving me an opening, and he countered any of my attempts to create one. The deadly dance continued, and I kept trying to coalesce my ether. Though it was there, it was like trying to collect water with a sieve. Finally, I managed to pull the elven spear I retrieved from the ancient armory into my hand. I dropped both blades in favor of the ancient weapon, parrying Caelora's attack and sweeping the spear in an arc as he retreated. His right thigh now sported a deep gash with some of the muscle exposed. I did not give him time to react, pressing the attack. Caelora was now hobbled, and suddenly I had the advantage. He seemed unfamiliar with fighting against a spear. I scored a hit to his abdomen, then another to the injured thigh. He tried to retrieve something from his belt, but that was his downfall. I drove the spear into his sternum, pinning him to the wall. He was trying to thumb the top off a potion in his hand. Instead of stopping him, I moved in close and wrenched the Magebane blade from his grasp. He brought the potion to his lips, but I used the spider blade to open his throat, the poison coating the blade as I slashed. My aether channels burned as the blade sucked what little ether my body had to create its supernatural concoction. The potion tried to heal the wound, so I sawed away frantically until his head was severed. The mage's body slid down the wall, the spear tip scraping the stone as it went. With his head in one hand and the dripping spider blade in the other, I dropped the head and joined him on the ground. The adrenaline of battle ebbed away, and every injury on my body began screaming as the rush faded. I pulled a canteen of water from my dimensional space, ignoring the ether burn from the action. I drained it dry, belching loudly. I did not bother offering any to the summoner. Exhaustion swept over me, amplified by the potions, the aether backlash, the poison, and my wounds. If I slept here, I would likely wake up inside an earth drake's stomach. I gathered my black blade and positioned the mage's body and head on his robes before starting to drag it back to the safe room. Once the pain of the ether burn lessened, I would use the collector on him. The corridors seemed much longer than they had before, and every step was a chore. The ice drake was still mostly blocking the corridor he needed to use the collector on it soon, or risk losing its essence. I pulled the mage past the drake and into the safe room. The black spear was near the owlbear in the center of the safe room, and the goblin had rummaged through my pack, consuming everything that was edible. It was now in a contented food coma, oblivious to my presence. I guessed it had not eaten in days. I glanced at the dungeon exit, wondering how the company was managing. The goblin lay sprawled on the ground, its belly bloated and drooling in its sleep, blowing grotesque bubbles of saliva. I assumed it could finally die happy with a full belly. The goblin had tossed everything out of my pack, scattering it across the room. I thought briefly about killing the small, unsightly creature, but it had saved my life in its own way. It seemed too cruel to kill my benefactor in its sleep. I moved as quietly as possible to reclaim the spear and make sure it had no access to any weapons. I would let it fend for itself in the dungeon when it woke. My veins and arteries still burned with every beat of my heart, warning me against using any more aether. On the other hand, I had 3 powerful potential essences in this room. I would not risk permanent damage by returning the goblin to my dimensional space, but I could at least claim the essences, as that should just require a tiny amount of aether. I felt a sense of urgency to catch up with the others, as Caelora had the kettle of souls. I started by searching the mage, no longer squeamish about looting the dead. The robe I had used to drag him to the safe room seemed to resist staining Gavin. The pools of blood from his neck had not soaked into the fabric. It was probably an artifact, so I snapped it in the air, rolled it up, and stuffed it into my conveniently emptied pack. He wore a single shiny, untarnished gold ring on each finger. Both were definitely dungeon artifacts. His elaborate black belt had 6 small sewn-in pouches, 3 on each hip, each just big enough for a hand. I checked them, but they were all curiously empty. Maybe he had used everything. I coiled the appealing utility belt and added it to my pack as well. A heavy gold and silver medallion rested around what remained of his neck. Another artifact, and possibly similar to Castile's ether shield amulet. I had depleted his ether shield during the fight. I put it in the pack for now. His boots were nice, but they were far too small for me. There was not much else of use here, so I assumed the summoner had left his pack elsewhere. I strapped my black blade and the Magebane blade to my pack, shouldered it, and carried the spear as I left the room. The walk to the owlbear room seemed to take forever, but I was rewarded with a room filled with tall grasses and dark berry bushes. I quickly located the untouched reward chest for defeating the owlbear. Without hesitation, I shattered it, and was relieved to find the greater healing potion I was hoping for. I drank it immediately, the multitude of injuries fading like a bad dream. I had not realized how injured I truly was until the warmth of the healing potion washed over me. I could have waited hours and healed myself with my spell form, but I needed to catch up with the others, so time was of the essence. I packed away the silver coins and a second potion. A quick glance at the runic script told me it enhanced one's strength when consumed. I pulled the collector from my dimensional space, my aether channels flaring in protest at even this smallest of aether expenditures. I considered my armor for a moment. It was in terrible condition, with multiple holes in the resin-infused hide from the powerful arcane missiles. I unbuckled it, discarding the pieces on the floor. Even my clothes underneath had numerous holes. Feeling much freer in my movements, I returned to the safe room. The goblin was still sleeping, with a larger puddle of drool beneath its chin. At least it seemed to be having pleasant dreams. I used the collector on the owlbear first, wincing at the effort of channeling even a wisp of either into it. As the disc pulled the rich blue smoke, I worried it had been too long since the creature's death to yield anything, but I was rewarded with a modest dark purple Spheria major strength essence. The summoner was next. I placed the collector on his chest, anticipating something substantial. I jumped when the goblin let out a loud flatulence. It was an attack, just not a physical one. As the foul cloud reached me, I covered my nose as I channeled my ether despite the persistent pain. I was rewarded with an apex essence, a luminescent pearl for increasing aether pool capacity. I thumbed the sphere in appreciation. This was much better than the magic affinity I had expected. I wanted to consume it immediately, but I was still recovering from my last earth essence, and my ether channels were still on fire. The burn was so bad I was sweating. The headless drake in the corridor was the last potential essence. I packed the apex pearl in my pack and moved to where the drake lay. It really was a beautiful creature when it was not trying to kill you. I ran my hand along the scales, which were silky smooth and cool to the touch. If Mavaith were here, he'd probably be upset that I was not working hard to harvest the creature properly. I balanced the collector on its body and endured the increasing pain. The rich blue etheric smoke formed quickly. A dark blue aquamarine sphere formidon apex water affinity essence. I was slightly shocked, but appreciative. I packed the essence with the collector in my bag. With the black blade and the Magebane blades strapped to my pack, I shouldered it. Once the aether burn lessened, I would store the entire pack. But for now, I needed to avoid further damage to my channels. I prepared to exit the dungeon, carrying only the spear. The goblin chose that moment to stir, panicking when it saw me. I held the spear in a non-threatening manner, resting the butt on the floor. The goblin scurried into the wall. "I'm sorry, but I cannot take you with me. No more free rides. Best of luck, little guy." I saluted the petrified creature and stepped into the oily portal, leaving behind the terrified but satiated goblin. The bright snow momentarily blinded me as I exited the dungeon. It was midday, the brilliant sun reflecting off the snow. I swung the spear in a defensive arc as my eyes adjusted. Red splotches filled my blurry vision, and soon I could see the Legion armor and blood-stained snow. No specters in sight. Further away, near the collapsed tavern, lay a troll with a Legionnaire's body pinned beneath it. I inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp, cool air, finally free of the stale dungeon atmosphere. I sighed as I saw no sign of the company. It should not have been more than 2 hours since they had fled ahead of me. The hearth tree's green canopy extended high above me. I took a quick glance at the branches, looking out for the giant eagles, but saw none. I assumed the wyverns had finished them off. Still, it would be a shame to fall prey to an attack now that freedom was so close. I relaxed slightly, and I surveyed the area around me. No specters were in sight. On inspection, I recognized the body under the troll as Lucien, the horsemaster. I closed his wide, shocked eyes and whispered, "Thank you for sharing your wisdom about horses." I sighed, recalling our time in Formica. Another legionnaire lay within the tavern wreckage, a bow still clutched in his grasp. I assumed it was Pavel, but I did not venture into the debris to confirm. Beneath the tavern rubble were runic armor and a great sword, but this was not the time to retrieve them. The courtyard where the dungeon entrance lay was packed with snow. The tracks showed the company scaling the wall to my right since the entrance had collapsed. I picked up a Legion helm, red hair spilled out, and as I turned it over, Remu's frozen head rolled out. His milky eyes stared up at me from the icy snow. My own indifference to his lifeless face surprised me. My helm was the only piece of my own armor left. I still had the full set of armor gifted to me by the Duchess, but I would not be able to retrieve it for some time. The torn bodies of 3 legionnaires lay scattered and pressed into the snow. This confirmed that the wyverns had killed the entire group. Soren, Cyrus, and Remus. I started piecing together a set of armor. Cyrus had been short but barrel-chested, and his upper body armor would fit me well enough. Soren had been taller, and his greaves should work for me. As I dug out Cyrus' body when a familiar voice called out, "Eric!" I spun to see Mavaith standing in front of the dungeon entrance. "Mavaith, did you all go back into the dungeon?" I looked at the wall the company had climbed, then back at Mavaith. Mavaith's voice echoed too loudly. "No. I have been searching the dungeon for you. I have been going in and out, hoping to find you." My throat tightened at the loyalty and friendship he showed. "Thank you, Mavaith, for having faith. What about the company?" They went over the wall. "They planned to find a building to access the Undercity," Mavaith replied, but his booming voice drew a specter through the wall. I grabbed my spear and a single stab dispersed it. The spear must have been stronger than my black blade, since it usually took more than one strike with the blade to finish a specter. Mavaith rushed to my side, ready to help. I whispered, "Keep your voice down." "Mavaith, keep watch while I salvage some armor. I am sorry. I was just so happy to see you alive." "What happened to your armor? Is the summoner coming?" he asked much more quietly while standing over me as I worked. I growled unhappily as I pulled the body from its icy grave. The summoner destroyed my armor. I don't think he'll be joining us, Maveth grunted, but did not ask further questions. I have words from Caelora. She asked me to tell you that you should stop playing the hero. I clenched my jaw as I heard Caellora's message, and my hands were soon numb from the cold as I claimed the armor from my fallen comrades. Legion armor was precisely fitted to each person. I knew I would get some chafing from wearing this armor, but it was better than nothing. All right, Maveth, let us get out of here. The company had packed snow and debris to create a small ramp up to the wall. It was just over 10 feet high, and I managed to pull myself up. Maveth handed me the spear as I surveyed the city from the top of the courtyard's wall. He climbed up to join me. Half of the buildings had collapsed over the centuries, but some remained, some still reaching several stories high. It seemed like the weeks we had spent in the dungeon had compacted the snow somewhat. The bluish heads of several specters were visible above the snow, indicating that the depth was around 4 or 5 feet. The company had broken a path through the snow to a building across the street. Wyvern Eric, Maveth whispered, startling me and drawing my attention behind us. In the distance, a wyvern circled far away from the city. It must have been released from the summoner's control when he entered the dungeon and had yet to wander off. We need to reach the Undercity and catch up with the others. I see dozens of specters down the street. I dropped the spear and lowered myself onto the packed snow. Maveth landed with a thud beside me. I barely had time to grab the spear before the first specter emerged from the snow around us. A quick upward slash dispatched the specter. Move, Maveth, I hissed as I followed the path the company had cleared. The narrow channel through the snow was dangerous, as specters could appear right next to us. The spear proved invaluable, easily dispersing specters with one strike. Reaching the building door, we found it had been smashed in. I stepped over the threshold, looking around. Maveth, do you have your glowstone? He entered behind me, and I turned to defend the door while Maveth retrieved it. I avoided retrieving my own glowstone to spare my channels further strain. By the time Maveth retrieved the glowstone, I'd already cut down 2 more specters. The building appeared to be a shop, though its display cases were long destroyed and its furniture had collapsed. Drifts of snow had gathered through broken windows, but I could see multiple footprints in the dust and snow. Find where they went. I'll hold the door. As Maveth followed the company's tracks, I cut down 3 specters. The commotion would definitely draw more. Over here, Eric, Maveth finally called. I retreated after dispatching another specter. The specters would reform in about half an hour, and I was eager to put some distance between us. At the back of the shop, Maveth found stairs leading down into the Undercity. Clear footprints in the dust showed the company had gone that way. Go, I urged the Goliath. I followed Maveth down the stairs. Once we reached the landing, we saw tracks in the dust leading both right and left. Which way? Maveth asked, focusing on a specter approaching from the left. I was puzzled by the tracks. It looked like the company had split, with half going left and the other half going right. No, this had to be Constantine laying a false trail for the summoner. If I were Constantine, which path would I choose? In the glowstone light, it took us a few minutes to identify that one set of tracks looked slightly larger. Backtracking is much harder than following a trail of laid footfalls, Maveth intoned softly, pointing towards the likely path. We moved to follow it. 100 feet further down the tunnel, the first turn showed signs that someone had been waiting in ambush around the corner. The dust was disturbed, and there were spots of drying urine on the wall, clear signs we were heading in the right direction. A specter interrupted our inspection of the intersection. Maveth's hammer made quick work of it, and we moved out before it could reform. We followed the trail, cutting down a few more specters that appeared more frequently. The roots of the hearth tree blocked several passages, and it seemed the company was circling around the root system in the opposite direction from where we had arrived. It did not make much sense, unless they were planning to leave the city by a different route. I recalled the map of the city in my head. The hearth tree was in the northern district, near the city wall. My best guess was that they were planning to exit as far from the library as possible in case the summoners searched there first. After killing a 5th specter in just a few minutes, I paused in the corridor. Maveth, do you think we should try to find our way to the library instead of following the company's path? Maveth considered the question. Why? Do you not wish to reunite with everyone? It's not that. They're headed for areas of the city with a high concentration of specters. We could get swarmed, and Castiel may have stopped using the kettle on dissipated specters to make it harder to follow them, since they don't know the summoner is dead. We spent weeks thinning out the specters around the library. It might be safer for us to go that route. Maveth looked thoughtfully down both directions of the corridor. If you think the library is safer, then we should go that way. Maveth tightened his grip on his hammer. I turned around and we backtracked to the first split in the corridor. Soon we encountered a familiar specter, a teenage elf in a ball gown. I remembered her clearly from the first time I had faced her. I cut her down and we started following the other set of tracks. Before long, we reached the room beneath the adventurers' tavern we had sheltered in. The wyverns had collapsed the structure. Constantine must have laid the false tracks to this point to confuse the elven mage. We continued to follow the clear path all the way back to the wine cellar. Only 6 wandering specters confronted us on the journey far, fewer than on the short path we had followed for Castiel and the others. We entered the wine cellar, which appeared undisturbed, and no specters were present. I could use a rest, Maveth. I think we're safe here. I sat down on one of the bunks we had hauled into the room. I was exhausted and famished after using so many healing potions. I assumed we'd face a fight to make it from the library to the city gates. I was tempted to retrieve something from my dimensional space, but my aether channels were still flaring. Just one small item should not hurt, right? I pulled the dreamscape amulet to my hand and winced at the pain. How long was this burn going to last? Maybe Castiel's books in the dreamscape had an answer. Maveth eyed the amulet knowingly. I'll stand watch for specters, Eric. You can rest. He began walking up and down the rows of bottles while I made myself comfortable. With just a painful trickle of aether, I entered the dreamscape. The dreamscape creations greeted me. Lucien, the horsemaster, was among them, and a heavy weight settled on me seeing him alive and smiling. I talked to him about horses while Oscar circled me excitedly with a ball. Raeli's clone demanded to know when she was going to be freed from her prison. Constantine Xavier and Adrian pestered me to spar, but I turned them down as I moved to the shelves of books. Fabian interrupted me, saying, "You know, Eric, if you are passing through the library, I wouldn't mind getting some more reading material." I paused, looking at him. I had already added all 300 books the Caelorian elves had on herbalism and apothecary to the dreamscape. I recalled the other sections of the library: cooking and brewing, weaving, woodcraft, and a floor filled with books on metallurgy, everything from household goods to weapons and armor. "I'll see what I can do, Scholar Fabian," I replied, and the manifestation of my subconscious smiled brightly. I focused on learning what I could about either burn from the books Castiel had manifested. The news was not good. If you continued using either while feeling the sensation of burning, you risked destroying your ability to channel aether. It was described as feeding the fire, so I had already reduced my capacity to channel. After a storm of curses, which made everyone back away from me fearfully, I calmed down. The text said that healing ether channels required consuming apex channeling essences, and it would take around a dozen or more to restore each point of potential. I guessed it might take less for me. Maybe I could even manage with major essences. However, I currently had no channeling essences. The only ones I ever had came from the manticores and gargantuan dungeon spider. I reread the Burnt Mage chapter a few times before putting the book back on the shelf. The amount of pain a Burnt Mage experienced depended on how many points of potential they had lost. Based on the pain I felt, I feared I had lost quite a few points. There was nothing I could do about it now, and there was nothing I would change about the fight except running sooner. Since my slow-aging spell form constantly drew aether, I would be in constant pain until I consumed the necessary aether channeling essence. I played with Oscar and practiced with my new spear for a while before leaving the dreamscape. Maveth had pulled dozens of bottles of elven wine from the racks and placed them on another bunk. "Any specters?" I asked as I stood. "None," he grumbled tiredly. I nodded. That was good news. It meant the specters had not tracked us. "Rest for a while, Maveth, and then we'll visit the towers and the library before leaving the city." "Why?" he asked, confused. "Confused. I want to gather some books to take with us." Maveth looked at the wine he was selecting. "I was hoping you could take some of these if you had space. I am partial to the deep red ones in the green bottles." I revealed my issue to him. I'll see what I can do. I burnt my ether channels fighting the summoner. With a very serious tone, Maveth said, "Your body tells you when you need to stop using ether. Everyone knows that." I frowned but did not respond. Caelora had told me as much, but I had pushed my limits. My ether tolerance far exceeded my ether pool, and I had been forced to drink the ether restoratives repeatedly, just seconds apart. Eventually, Maveth laid down with the dreamscape amulet, and I took watch. Hours later, Maveth woke with a yawn and a burst of morning flatulence. I moved away from the deadly cloud and figured it had been long enough to try accessing my dimensional space again. I pulled out the elven tablet reader table, and while my channels still burned, it had not gotten any worse. I took a deep breath and activated the table through the pain. I was stunned by what I saw. My ether channeling was 2,757, dropping from 2,858. I had only lost a single point of potential. Why was the pain so intense? Was I just weak? What would it feel like if I lost 2 or 3 points? Suddenly, I felt a lot more sympathy for the old healer back in Sobrol. Maveth kept his distance, respecting my privacy. I reset the reader. "Do you want to use it?" I asked, but he shook his head. I pulled out the thermal stone and a large quantity of food for a feast, letting Maveth prepare it. We had potatoes, bacon, and liver for Maveth. Even with my ring of sustenance, I had an enormous appetite, keeping pace with Maveth, who was more than a little surprised as we mock raced to finish our food. I moved all 48 bottles of dark red elven wine into my space, to join the 9 remaining bottles. The ether burn was the same whether I was moving a large or small item. Maveth shook his head in sympathy. Perhaps disappointment as I winced from the effort. It was a different type of pain than physical. I reactivated my slow-aging spell. It felt like fire coursing through my veins instead of blood. Over time, I hoped I could get used to it. Before sending my pack to storage, I studied the runes on both of the summoner's rings, turning the thermal stone slowly. I would figure out what they did in the dreamscape sometime later. I attached the black blade to my hip and decided to send the Magebane blade to storage with the pack. My head exploded in a flash of light then nothing. I woke on the floor with a genuinely concerned Maveth kneeling over me, shaking me. "Eric, wake up!" he shouted, rattling my armor with his efforts. "I'm awake!" I protested. "What happened?" Maveth exhaled in relief. "Your backpack shot across the room and slammed into the wall, and you collapsed." My head hurt, and my ether channels flared with each beat of my heart. I recalled what happened. I opened my dimensional space, selected an open spot for the pack, tried to close it, and then boom, something in the pack could not be stored in my dimensional space. I quickly scanned my storage and was relieved to see everything intact. Rhealia seemed unharmed, though I would not know for sure until I released her. I rubbed my aching head, reactivating my slow-aging spell form again, and dealt with the pain. I picked up the pack, ensuring the collector was unharmed. Something among the summoner's belongings resisted being stored. "I think I'm finite" was just extreme backlash, like when I failed to store the summoner's head, but 10 times worse. I stood unsteadily, searching through the pack. I had my suspicions it was either the robe or the belt, or it could have been the rings or the amulet. My splitting headache felt like some modicum of revenge from the dead mage. I pulled out the robe and belt but decided against trying again. I replaced them, shouldering the pack. I stored the Magebane blade and the essence collector instead. Let's head to the tower. We only encountered 2 specters on our walk, and one did not even attack. It was just an elf boy wandering the undercity with a toy soldier in his hand. We climbed the tower and the lingering, unwashed smell of the company still hung in the air, even after weeks. The sun was shining outside, and Maveth looked to me for direction. "Bring me the books on smithing. We'll take as many as I can store to sell. In the meantime, I'll page through as many of these other books as I can to add to the dreamscape." Maveth did not question the delay in leaving the city and got to work. It was about midday, judging by the sun outside. I decided I would work until sunrise the next day, then we'd leave. My Elvish had improved significantly, making it easier to translate the titles. Since I was only paging through, I was not consuming the knowledge but enjoyed the faded illustrations briefly as I worked, preparing to add them to the dreamscape later. After sunset, I worked under the glowstone while the stack of smithing books Mavith brought started growing large. Doubted I would be able to take them all. Mavith finished his task, bringing all the viable books, and I moved on to paging through the woodcraft books. My eyes burned as I turned pages hour after hour. Mavith was snoring softly by the time dawn crept through the window. I had just finished the woodcraft collection and let Mavith sleep until I was done. Then I stood, cracking my back. I was surprised I could store all 500 books Mavith had brought from the other library, but I had to remove some apples and potatoes. My extra-dimensional storage cube was getting crowded, but eventually I would page through the books to add them to the dreamscape and could sell them. Maybe I could return one day to collect the rest, though I assumed that once Caelora reported back, the Empire would clear the city of specters and take the intact tomes. Mavith, I called out loudly to wake my friend. He woke quickly, standing on alert. It's almost time to leave. I'll get some sleep while you cook. Wake me when you are ready to leave. With that, I channeled a bit of ether into the dreamscape amulet and fell into slumber. It's time to go, Mavith said after taking the amulet from my hand as I woke. Mavith had left a plate of food for me to enjoy. It was mid-morning, and our last day in the lost elven city of Caelora. We descended the tower together, Mavith's heavy steps echoing, drawing a spectre. A translucent elf appeared, wearing a leather apron and wielding a hammer. The black spear hummed as I effortlessly slashed through the phantasm. We moved back into the main library. The vast chamber was much emptier than when we had arrived. Piles of fragile books lined one wall, but the company had broken apart most of the shelves to keep warm during the weeks we were there. We had tried to avoid burning the ancient books, but many had been used as fuel if they were deemed too deteriorated to be salvaged. Eric, look. Mavith paused and knelt. At first I did not see it, but there were small footprints in the light layer of recent dust. Goblin tracks, his deep voice informed me. How many? Maybe we cleared enough specters that the local goblins have nested here. I scanned the open room for movement. Small tracks, probably a young green. Only one unique set, Mavith said after a moment standing. I could not help but laugh. That little bugger. He must have followed us, I explained to the confused Goliath. I used the goblin to distract the summoner. I left it in the dungeon, but it saw me exit. I guess it didn't want to spend its final days in the dungeon. Mavith spent a few minutes tracking the goblin, but soon gave up when the tracks crossed themselves repeatedly. Most likely, the creature was hiding somewhere in the library. It just might survive if it could keep avoiding the specters. Maybe it would even follow us out of the library. At this point, it definitely deserved its freedom. Outside the library, the snow was still present, compacted down to about 5 feet, and from the steps, we could only see the head of a single specter walking the streets. The city gates were still a few blocks away, maybe a quarter mile. There could also be more specters hidden below the snow if they were shorter. We had certainly seen a large number of spectral children during our time in the city. Mavith, maybe we could make some snowshoes from some of the shelving, I suggested. Mavith processed my words but looked confused. How would shoes made out of snow help us? I patted my tall friend on the back, smiling. An hour later, we had makeshift snowshoes, strapped to our feet-wide planks tied to our boots. I had gone snowshoeing a few times before, and gave Mavith some advice. One step at a time. Plant your heel first with your lead foot, and don't rush it. My spear can handle any specters quickly, so don't panic and fall. I do not know. Are you sure these will allow us to walk on the snow? They do not seem enchanted, Eric, Mavith said, skeptical. I was concerned too. He was such a large man, even slimmed down a bit. He was likely around 350 pounds more with his gear. I reassured the Goliath. The snow has compacted over the last few months. We shouldn't have any trouble. I climbed onto the snow first, sinking just an inch or two with each step. Mavith followed hesitantly. His larger feet sank a few inches, but he stayed atop the snow. He paused, amazed that it worked. As we walked through the blinding white snow, I led and stabbed any specter foolish enough to show itself. Fortunately, it seemed the specters could not see through the snow themselves. We had walked the first block, halfway to the gate, when Mavith informed me. The goblin is at the library doors. I twisted awkwardly and saw the tiny goblin standing there, watching us leave. It was a pitiful sight, looking like we were abandoning the childlike creature. It's light enough that it does not even need snowshoes. It's on its own now. We need to hurry and get under the trees. Will be too visible against the snow to wyverns or eagles, I said, turning and continuing across the snow. We reached the gate quickly and faced a problem. The gap in the gate was buried beneath the snow. While Maveth dug into the snow, I guarded him. Half a dozen specters interrupted his work, and he was struck twice while digging. I responded quickly, but they appeared suddenly from the snow wall. Maveth was limping but managed to climb over the snowpack on the other side of the gate. I followed, and we moved rapidly away from the walls of Caelora. Maveth was leading, stumbling a few times as he missed his steps with the snowshoes. Soon we were under the cover of the barren branches. We stopped to catch our breath, both laughing. We were free. We were on the eastern side of the ruins. We could head west to the city of Parvis, about 50 miles away, or south to Sobrel, about 70 miles through dire wolf territory. Alternatively, we could head northwest, following the river back to Telha, the capital. As we rested under the trees, the tiny goblin emerged from the city gate, running wildly with books tied to its feet, mimicking our snowshoes. A few spectral heads pursued it, bobbing just above the snow as it raced for the trees. It disappeared into the forest, still running. Maveth and I looked at each other and shrugged. That brief excitement over, Maveth asked. Where are we going from here? The company has nearly a day's head start on us. I think they would have headed north to the capital if they exited near the northern wall. The city of Parvis is the closest, though maybe just a 2-day walk for us, following the river. Castile wanted to avoid Parvis because Duke Octavian's son is the count there, but they have a portal to the capital. We might even beat the company to Tella if we go that way. I realized Maveth was not aware of Castile and the company's conflict with Duke Octavian. After considering for a moment, Maveth questioned, what about heading back to Sobrel? Should we not inform the Duchess of our success? I shrugged. I'm a bit worried about the dire wolves with just the two of us, Maveth. Parvas, then to the capital? Then I can take a ship back to Stone Mountain Island. He nodded, as this route took him in the direction he wanted to go to confess to his father. We kept to the cover of the trees as we moved east. After about 6 miles, the snowpack had dwindled to just 2 feet deep, and we discarded our snowshoes. Maveth's snowshoes had been falling apart anyway. We reached the wide, uncrossable Agantarao River and followed it toward Parvis. The snow showed a lot of tracks bears, gnolls, humanoids with boots, wolves, and even some horse tracks that Maveth insisted were centaur tracks. All these creatures had given the ruins of Caelora a wide berth, obviously smarter than us. Night descended about halfway to the city. We made camp in the center of a group of evergreens and used the thermal stone to cook. The stone was a huge boon providing heat for cooking without any smoke or scent of burning wood that would attract creatures. Still, with just the two of us, I stayed on watch all night, while Maveth slept in short spurts with the amulet. As Maveth entered another round of sleep with the amulet, I carried a glowstone a short distance into the woods. I listened for a while, only hearing the soft crackle of snow refreezing after the mild day. I considered waking Maveth, decided against it. There was a mix of jealousy and fear that he might leave with her. Raelia stood before me, crouched in anticipation. The glowstone shadowed her features, and she exhaled a cloud of steam in the chilly night air. After seeing I was alone, she finally spoke. We're out of the dungeon? Her posture relaxed. Yes, we are about 20 miles west of Parvis. Do you know where that is? I asked. With a note of sorrow, she looked around. I know where Parvis is. Did Maveth not make it? I doubted she would have had the same concern for me. Maveth is sleeping, I said, adding a little white lie to spur her. My company is not far off with my mage commander. You should get going. I suggest traveling south, crossing the river, and making your way home. I produced her pack and handed it to her. There's food and some fragile items inside, so be careful with it. You should make haste. She sheathed her blades and stepped forward to take her pack. Surprised by its weight, she shouldered it and was about to turn but paused. If you are ever captured, she began, then hesitated. Ask for General Clallan Glavian. I'll tell my brother you helped me. He'll make sure you end up in a work camp rather than strung up with the other legionnaires." "What a generous offer," I replied with a mocking undertone. She rolled her eyes at me one last time, checked the position of the moon, and trudged off into the snow. I listened to her footsteps fade away. I hoped she made it home safely. I wondered what her reaction would be when she saw the griffin egg and apex fire essences in her pack. Certain she was gone, I returned to camp and warmed myself with the thermal stone. I took out the large pearl essence I had collected from the summoner and placed it in my mouth. A tingling feeling spread through my body as it dissolved. It was easy to swallow, like cool water, and chills spread from my abdomen to my extremities. My heart pounded, recognizing the potential power I was consuming. I felt my ether core swell, and my ether channels flared in protest he was going to need to get them repaired. The core enhancement briefly distorted my spell forms, causing me to lose my connection to the slow-aging spell before it re-established itself. I would have to ask Castile if increasing my ether core could endanger my spell forms. When everything settled, I released a relieved groan. I showed restraint in not checking my attributes immediately. Once we reached safety, I could review my progress. We started moving early in the day, walking along the river. A barge loaded with soldiers, along with a handful of legionnaires in red armor, came up behind us. We paused, thinking we could get a ride the rest of the way to Parvisit was still nearly 30 miles away. Even half a mile off, I could see Benito jumping up and down, pointing at Mevaeth and me, yelling something I could not make out as the barge changed course, heading toward us. The entire company crowded the bow as the craft scraped the sandy shoal below the bank where we stood. Castile could not hide her smile, and Constantine shook his head. Benito was yelling about winning some bet. We scrambled down the bank to board, receiving pats on the back and half hugs. Curiously, one member of the company was missing Flavius. The bargemen got the barge back into the river, grumbling about the smell of legionnaires they had picked up along their journey. The 40 or so soldiers knew better than to complain about our unwashed bodies. After being fed and deflecting questions for an hour by telling them we escaped by returning to the library and using the west gate exit the city, I ended up in a secluded spot on the bow with Castile and Adrian. Castile asked quietly, "The summoner?" "They won't be following us," I said flatly. Castile nodded slowly, relief flooding her face, but she did not press for details. "Where is Flavius?" I asked about the missing member. Adrian answered with skepticism. "Constantine said a white got him in the Undercity when they scouted our escape route together." Castile's face remained unreadable. Castile let out a long breath. "The Empire is at war. The Ezenem elves have landed on Amatalho's Isle, breaking the peace treaty that stood for centuries. Word is that the Bhutan orcs are also gathering a fleet, but no one knows where they will land once they sail." The summoner had mentioned the Ezenem elves. I stayed quiet, and Adrian continued. "Everyone is descending on the swamps south of Makkah. There are even rumors that the Emperor might leave his palace." My mouth fell open. A 4-nation war was brewing over the site of the city of the giants, at Lanchimel, because I told a single truth-seeker about it. After I digested the news and my potential role in sending thousands of men to die on a swampy battlefield, I inquired, "Ere we headed back to Makkah then? Maybe we should have stayed in the dungeon, it would have been safer." Castile smirked at my attempt at humor but looked uncertain. "I won't know our orders until I report to the Legatus Legionis in Parvus." Castile observed the departure of Legionnaire Eric and the Goliath from the safe room. Curiosity about how the young legionnaire would kill the Earth Drake pulled her to investigate. She considered sending her all-seeing eye to follow them, but the extra ether required in the dungeon was best conserved. She was fortunate to have such a hidden power in the company, but keeping the others ignorant of it had become a full-time job. Flavius in particular was starting to ask too many questions. Adrian believed he would try to gain favor with a first citizen or Praetorian guard when they reached a city. Castile had her own ideas on how to protect the legionnaire, but first she needed to protect herself. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the rest of the legionnaires. Despite the looming danger of the summoner within the dungeon, a sense of camaraderie and determination radiated from them as they prepared. The summoner's presence in the dungeon was a constant threat, and any attempt to flee would likely result in his swift pursuit. Their best chance was to ambush him when he emerged, but even that carried considerable risk. If the summoner controlled the dungeon creatures, he could send them out first to occupy the company, then join the attack himself. Treleon's reputation as the most powerful summoner on the continent overshadowed the fact that he was also a formidable battle mage. Though he had not fought on the front lines in a century, Castile had read the histories and knew how much of a threat he posed and how feared he had been when he fought the Empire. The company's best option was to distance themselves from the summoner and reach the safety of a city as quickly as possible. Castile reflected on the mission and still felt the pain of all the men she had failed and lost since Duchess Veronica assigned it to her. She wished she had never accepted it. Young Lysander had been the first to fall in the Undercity. Lysander had grown up in the village of Medina, near where she had been born. He was a good lad, and his fate was undeserved, just like many of the conscripted legionnaires in the Empire. She chuckled to herself, remembering the times she had Delmar instruct Lysander to add too much salt to the soup, or intentionally burn dinner. He sabotaged the food preparation without hesitation, taking the ire of the men for his poor cooking skills, even though he was following her orders. Then there was Delmar, who had also fallen to a wight. He was from the small town of Corsica, and sent most of his pay to his ex-wife and children, hoping they would grow up better than he had. As long as she lived, Castile vowed to continue sending the 20 silver a month that Delmar used to. At first, she had suspected that Constantine had orchestrated Delmar's death, but after listening to the retelling of the combat and seeing Constantine's guilt, she decided he hadn't intentionally gotten Delmar killed. Delmar was an excellent swordsman, his sternness contrasting Adrian's congeniality with the men. She had been fortunate to have him in her service. The Empire had arrested Delmar for withholding artifacts obtained from delving, and he chose conscription over a decade of labor in the imperial quarries. She had helped him get his gambling problem under control, and counted him as a friend and loyal subordinate. Her heart ached at the memory of young Felix and his infectious smile. Due to their cheerful personalities, she frequently paired new legionnaires with him and Matteo. Felix was from the northern coast, but she couldn't remember the name of his town, because he always said it was too small to deserve one. Felix had no woman but spoke fondly of his younger sister. Castile planned to write her a letter about Felix's bravery and send some coin to help her. Lucien the horsemaster was a good man and too decent a person to be forced into a soldier's life. She believed he had an illegitimate child somewhere. She would check with Adrian, who knew all the men's life stories. Lucien and Pavel had given their lives so that Benito and Lurkin had a chance to live. Pavel never spoke much about himself, but if ever there was a pious man in the company, it was him. He would have been much better as an acolyte of one of the gods. He had chosen to become a legionnaire rather than starve on the streets of the city where he was born. Soren and Cyrus were two of the more malicious men in her company. Both had killed men in anger and mostly confided in each other. She was not saddened by their loss, but they had been her responsibility, so she had failed them as well. If Adrian knew of any of their children, she would send them something. Finally, there was Remus, the red-haired man from Amphia, a sailor and foreigner from Gregor's company. He had been involved in a brawl at the Telha docks and ended up in chains. He was outspoken and, truth be told, a bit of an ass. 7 more names were added to the list of men she would have to answer, for when she went to Pluto's realm for judgment. The list was getting much too long for her liking now. 117. She sighed heavily. Her eyes turned back to the corridor where Legionnaire Eric had left. A real, honest-to-goodness otherworlder. She was certain of it now. He had too much naivety and far too much unrealized power. He was the key to her potential freedom. If he lived long enough, perhaps she could convince him to join the Hounds, and eventually get close enough to destroy or switch her blood samples in the archives. She kept nudging him in that direction toward Constantine's circle, but it was probably reckless on her part. He did have the Dreamscape amulet, and she had never wanted to possess anything more in her life. Even though the created environment was a contrived fantasy, living in the Dreamscape was the first time she truly felt freedom and control over her fate. Resisting the urge to request it was difficult, and she waited for him to offer it again. The boy did not realize that once they reached a city, it would not be long before a first citizen confiscated the artifact. Adrian sat across from her, and they began reviewing the mental and physical health of the men. Most were healthy enough for a forced march. The question was whether they could get a head start on the summoner and reach a city in time. Rattling armor drew everyone's attention, and a scream echoed down the corridor. The swearing yell became clearer. "The summoner is in the owlbear room." Everyone froze. "Benito!" Adrian barked, and the nimble legionnaire raced off to get the others watching the Harpy and Earth Drake rooms. The company rapidly began packing their gear, readying themselves for the dungeon exodus. While the men prepared, Castile sent out her astral all-seeing eye to scout. The damnable dungeon forced her to use far more aether than she liked, just to send the scout down the corridors. If they were lucky, the owlbear would slow the summoner, but she doubted it. Her eye reached the room, and she swore the summoner was walking behind the owlbear, and his line of sight was directed right at her astral eye. In Elvish, he ordered the owlbear to run. Castile snapped her vision back, her voice cutting the air with an order. "Into the gate." Runic weapons led. The summoner has controlled the owlbear. Clinking red-armored men scrambled forward into the exit portal. They disappeared rapidly, their numbers dwindling. The noise of the charging owlbear echoed through the room. She looked to Adrian, who was counting the men. "Just missing Eric and the Goliath," he said. She turned and saw them a few dozen yards down the corridor. For a moment, it looked like they might all make it before the owlbear. But fate had other plans. The hulking owlbear burst into the room, and Castile tried to slow it down. Her wispy aether chains snaked across the floor and wrapped around the red-eyed owlbear. They were no match for the creature's powerful frame. It tore through the shadow chains as if they were paper. The owlbear screeched a sharp, piercing cry of challenge. Its glowing red eyes marked it as a dire owlbear, far stronger than the usual kind. Its body was saturated with ether, making it much more powerful. Eric entered from the far side of the room, taking in the scene. He yelled at her, "Get through the portal." Castile looked at the foolish young legionnaire. Maybe he had a plan, but she doubted even her entire company could have taken on a dire owlbear. Maybe if they had time to ambush Iton, if one of the most powerful mages on the continent were not right behind it. Adrian stood next to Calm in front of her, ready to protect her from the owlbear's charge. She looked at Eric and nodded. "Adrian, into the portal." Adrian hesitated, unwilling to leave Eric. Castile recalled that Eric had stood with him against a giant Eden. A man's foolish bravado. She yelled at him, "Move! Eric will occupy it with his air shields and follow us." Castile stepped into the back veil exit, Adrian and Calm behind her. The gray light of early morning hit her. The tavern was a pile of rubble, and the invigorating, fresh, cold air filled her lungs. The men were engaged with a handful of specters. Constantine's blade flashed sparks as he got her attention. 9 specters so far. "Are you going to kettle them?" His sword sparked again on another specter. Castile needed to decide quickly. "Form a defensive line around the exit. We will prepare for whatever emerges." Adrian added an order. "Eric and the Goliath still have to exit. Identify your target before releasing your bow." Chaos ensued as Castile used the kettle to eliminate the specters, and the men formed a line facing the dungeon. The body parts of dead legionnaires were scattered, staining the snow red. The men's feet packed the snow, and the specters were finally dealt with. The Goliath stumbled out of the dungeon, holding his side. A large patch of his soft abdominal leather armor was missing, and his flesh was pale in the early light. He stumbled past the 4 men in the shield wall. "Where's Eric?" Matteo asked the Goliath as he passed his shield. Matteo slammed the bottom of his damaged body shield into the snow once the Goliath was safely behind him. The Goliath turned to face the oily black wall. "He is coming," his deep voice informed the men, while he held his side and drank a potion. Castile moved closer to speak quietly with him. "What happened, Mavith?" she asked. Mavith seemed to gauge his response, but Castile's impatience showed through. He whispered, "The owlbear is dead, but the ice drake was rushing toward him. He will be victorious." He sounded as if he were trying to convince himself. Castile processed the news. The dire owlbear was dead on less threat. She looked around at the men, weighing options. "Adrian, get men over the wall. Clear an area on the other side, and I will use the kettle." Benito looked incredulous. "What about Eric?" Castile rebuked him, a little too harshly. "We will wait as long as we can for him. We are not going back into the dungeon to help him." Castile mused to herself that even if they tried, they would not find him in time to help. "I will go look for him," Benito chirped, moving toward the oily wall. Adrian barked at him. "Fool! You won't find him in time. He either exits soon, or is lost to us. Castile remained focused on the kettle as they guarded the exit. Almost an hour passed before she looked at Adrian, and their eyes met in agreement. Adrian announced, "Over the wall, we are leaving." Mavith, who had been fidgety, questioned the orders. "We should wait longer," Castile shook her head sadly. "We cannot wait. The summoner has most likely prevailed and is probably gathering dungeon creatures to exit ahead of him." Mateo laughed half-heartedly. "Don't worry. We'll probably get to the city and find Eric already at the baths." A chorus of agreements followed, and Benito was already starting a betting pool on when Eric would reappear. Most likely, no one would collect on it, as the dungeon would likely claim his body. But Castile did not stop the banter. "I am going to look for him," the Goliath announced, pulling his hammer from his belt. Castile was about to berate the Goliath and order him to follow the company, but instead, she slowly nodded. "When you find him, tell him he should stop trying to play the hero." The Goliath nodded and disappeared into the black entrance. Everyone held their breath, but nothing happened. Adrian's voice broke the silence. "Over the wall. I won't repeat myself." Packing down the snow and crossing the small plaza to the nearest standing house, they encountered numerous specters emerging from the white banks. Constantine and Flavius led the way, holding most of them back. A few men were struck, but nothing serious as they smashed the door and entered the ancient shop. Soon they were back in the Undercity. Constantine did a quick sweep before reporting, "We should lay a false trail. That way leads back to the library, which should eventually lead to the city's outer walls." Adrian was nearby. "If the summoner is following us, you should stop using the kettle. Let the specters reform and slow him down, along with whatever creatures he controls." Benito was within earshot. "How will Eric and Navarrete follow then?" Mateo pulled him aside to explain the reality. Castile agreed with the plan, putting away the kettle. They moved, using the hearth tree's roots to guide them. During a short rest, Constantine approached Castile to talk quietly. "Flavius plans to report directly to the Legatus Legionis when we reach a city." Castile remained calm. "Why?" "He thinks Eric is an otherworlder, and that you knew about it. He is also certain that Duranda's collector was in Eric's possession. He found multiple minor essences in the Goliath bags." Constantine informed her, studying her for a reaction. When Castile did not respond, Constantine asked, "What do you want me to do about it?" Castile was unsure whether she could trust Constantine, knowing about his other loyalties. Flavius could put Castile in a compromising position and force another tribunal in front of the truth-seekers. She looked Constantine in the eyes. His weathered face was expectant. Deciding that she could trust him, she said, "Do what needs to be done." He nodded and turned sharply. An hour later, Constantine came running from a side corridor he and Flavius had been exploring. "A room full of whites. They pulled Flavius in. Move before they realize there are more of us." Constantine moved to lead, pulling the company with him. Castile paused while the men rushed ahead, sending her all-seeing eye down the corridor. 2 turns later, she found Flavius' body, his throat slashed and a large pool of blood beneath him. His eyes were wide with shock. Damn it, Constantine. The city would turn the corpse. Flavius would become a specter, or perhaps even a wight. A necromancer could commune with the undead if the Empire ever retook the Sitya problem for another time. They soon took stairs up into a tower guardhouse in the wall. The company stood on the wall, looking back into the city behind them. The snow-covered buildings and the massive hearth tree looked almost serene, but they knew the truth. Thousands of specters remained, guarding the city from outsiders for eternity. He did not wait for Castile and jumped. Everyone looked over as he thudded into the snow and disappeared. He freed himself and started moving away from the city with his runic weapon drawn. Soon the entire company was on the ground, pressing through the snow. Only 2 specters interrupted their progress. When they reached a copse of evergreens, they paused to look back at the city. It was just a bad memory now. Castile had only 12 men left, plus the scholar. Blaze noted a wyvern in the distant sky, but it looked to be keeping its distance from the city. "Do you think it's tied to the summoner?" Adrian asked from her right. "No, it is just circling in a lazy hunt," she replied. "Do you think Eric is alive?" he asked a moment later. Castile considered the question. "No," she said sadly. "Get the men moving. We will march north and try to reach the capital as quickly as possible." Adrian hesitated, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, consoling her. After the moment passed, he barked at the men. "I think you have rested long enough." 2 men up front breaking snow. Rotate every 10 minutes. The path north was difficult. It was miles before the snow depth finally eased, making the trek slightly easier. They camped near the river with no fires, huddling together for warmth. In the morning, they marched along the old trade road that paralleled the river. "Sail, river barge," Wiley announced from ahead. They managed to flag down the barge, which was loaded with soldiers. When it beached on the bank, the captain of the unit reported to Castile, "Mage Commander, we're headed to the eastern border. Do you need a ride?" Castile looked over her men. They were exhausted and cold, and it was over 100 miles to the capital. The nearest city downriver was Parvus, but Count Cocus, Duke Octavian's second son, ruled the city. Still, they had a portal to the capital. "Yes, you can drop us off in Parvus, Captain." The men climbed aboard, relieved, and collapsed on the barge. The regular soldiers gave them a wide berth, and most of her men were asleep in no time. Castile settled on the barge as it broke away from the bank. She and Adrian moved to get news from the captain about what had happened during the past months. "Where have you been, Mage Commander? The entire continent is about to erupt in war. The Esenham elves have taken Amatalhos Isle off the coast. Most likely, they'll invade the mainland soon. It's rumored that the Bhutan orcs are also preparing a fleet. There are rumors of other nations mobilizing as well, but they don't hold much weight," the captain explained. Adrian was shocked. "Why?" "The city of the Titans, of course. Rumor is that Atlantium has been discovered in the swamps south of Maca." Castile and Adrian made eye contact before settling down and pressing the captain for as much information as they could. Hours later, they drifted peacefully under a light breeze. The crisp air was warmed slightly by the water, but chunks of ice floated slowly by. The rushing water was a lullaby for most of the company. The serenity was broken as Benito began jumping at the front of the barge. "There he is! That red dot has to be him." The company stirred, and everyone moved to the bow to see what had gotten Benito so excited. As the craft moved closer, a person in Legion armor was clearly walking on the high bank with a very tall person at his side. "I don't think it's him." "The armor looks to be in too good condition," Adrian whispered just to Castile. Castile did not wait. She sent out her eye and returned it to her body a moment later. "It is him, Adrian. The boys survived again. I will believe it when I see it." "What do you think happened to the summoner?" he asked. "I am assuming Eric killed him," she said flatly. Adrian turned to Castile, doubt on his face. The barge grounded on the bank, and the men swarmed the two figures. Castile let the reunion play out, failing to hide her own smile. One less person to add to her death roll, although his survival might cause more problems down the line. When things settled, Castile met Eric with Adrian at her side. She asked quietly, "The summoner?" "He won't be following us," Eric said flatly. Castile nodded slowly, relief flooding her face, but she did not press for details. Eric looked around the barge. "Where's Flavius?" Adrian answered. "Constantine said a white got him in the Undercity when they scouted our escape route together." Eric seemed stunned at the news, as he should have been. Flavius was an experienced scout, and maybe she would one day tell him that his death was to protect his secrets. Castile exhaled a long breath. "The Empire is at war. The Esenham elves landed on Amatalhos Isle, breaking the peace treaty that had stood for centuries. Word is that the Bhutan orcs are also pulling together a fleet, but no one knows where they will land once they sail." Adrian continued. "Everyone is descending on the swamps south of Masha. There are even rumors that the Emperor might leave his palace." Eric gawked in surprise. He stuttered slightly at the implication, worry in his voice. "Are we headed back to Masha then? Maybe we should have just stayed in the dungeon. It would have been safer." Castile could not hide her smirk, but she also feared what was to come. At least with a multi-nation war, no one would be focused on her small company. "I won't know our orders until I report to the Legatus Legionis in Parvus." It was only half a day to Parvus, and the docks were full of soldiers and legionnaires. Adrian came back to report that the Legion Hall was packed, and that the Legatus Legionis office was too busy to handle a report. The Telian Empire was always on a constant war footing, but this was different. The Empire was under threat, and mobilizing for a long campaign, Adrian said heavily. The Empire is pulling most of the soldiers from the Western Agorian front. The forts along the swamp will be left with just a skeleton force. You can bet the trolls and troglodytes will take advantage. When all is said and done, you can expect the Empire to be much smaller. No chance. The portal opens at midnight to the capital. We should be able to leave the city before he learns you are here, Adrian replied hopefully. Castile kept her company at the docks, but even then, Constantine and Firth managed to wander off despite her orders. She realized both needed to report to their masters. They returned just in time to march to the central square and join the company through the portal. Arriving in the capital was different from usual. In their silvery armor, over 100 of the Emperor's legionnaires guarded the sunken plaza. Archers trained arrows on them before relaxing, seeing it was just wagons of supplies and a small mage company. Castile relaxed, relieved that no one was there to arrest her. She turned to Adrian and Eric. Get everyone to the Eastern Legion Hall. I will go and report directly to the Legatus Legionis office. Castile nervously made her way to the office. She had prepared a report while waiting in Parvis. All she needed to do was hand it over. The scroll detailed everything that had happened since they marched from Sobral City. She had prepared it with the Imperial truth-seekers in mind, confirming the details and answering questions before they could be asked. She waited in a lobby to be dismissed, but was then asked to wait in a small conference room an hour later. Maybe they were just busy and could not deal with her at the moment. Hours began to blend together. She asked for a runner to inform Adrian she was waiting, but her request was denied. Eventually, the door opened, and she was shocked to see Constantine enter. He was followed by a tall older woman with graying black hair. Though Castile had never met Antonia Segreto, the merchant queen, she recognized her. A third person followed them in Centurion Cornelius, commander of the Eastern Legion Hounds. The door shut with authority, and she guessed Constantine had betrayed her to his Praetorian master. Constantine moved to stand in one corner of the room, his face blank. Cornelius moved to another corner, his face wearing the deceptive smile of an old man. Antonia sat across from Castile and introduced herself. I am Antonia Segreto. I have been following your career since your time in the Mage College. Castile was on the defensive. I am flattered. Why am I still here? Was my report incomplete? Antonia laughed. Incomplete? It reads like a tragic play. Most would think it fiction, concocted for sympathy. She gestured to Constantine. He confirmed every word of it was true, and Firth reported the same to Cornelius. Castile's head snapped around to each person, trying to puzzle things out. Constantine, sensing her discomfort, tried to ease her fears. You are not in jeopardy, Castile. They just want to talk. They just want to talk. Not in jeopardy yet, Antonia corrected, her smile blossoming. But if I continue, you will be. The question is, do you want me to continue? Constantine looked irritated. Just tell her, Antonia. He faced Castile. They need you. They need your ability to unweave spell forms before someone can manifest their spells. You are the only one who can do what they need. Castile was confused. Who do they need me to use my ability on? Antonia looked at Constantine. I hate it when you disrupt my delivery. She turned back to Castile, her tone conversational. We need you on a special team to help kill the Emperor.